Welcome, dear listener, to another serene evening with Mystery History for Sleep. Tonight, we embark on a journey inspired by a single, haunting question from one of you, a devoted soul in our community of night wanderers. Allow me to read it aloud. What happened in the 1700s, the era of the mud floods, the 1600s, when all the adults seemed to vanish? Foreign children were brought in, without parents, traumatized. And from where? Perhaps the world's fairs, and why the technology and the beautifully built cities were almost destroyed right after that. Oh, what a tapestry of enigma this weaves. It tugs at the edges of our slumber, doesn't it? Those words linger like mist over an ancient fairground, evoking images of lost innocence amid the clamour of progress long concealed. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them drift half shut as I paint the scene for you, slow and deliberate, like the creak of a wooden train car rocking through the endless night. Imagine that you are not yourself tonight, but a boy of 8 years, small and fragile, with the chill of autumn seeping through the thin fabric of your woolen coat. The world around you sways rhythmically, the iron wheels of the locomotive grinding against the rails in a lullaby of steel and steam. You awaken slowly, your eyelids fluttering against the dim lantern light that flickers from a distant compartment. There are no familiar voices calling your name, no warm hand to shake you gently from sleep. Instead, there is only the vast, echoing emptiness of the car, filled with dozens of other children like you, wide-eyed, silent, their faces pale as parchment under the grime of travel. Some huddle together, knees drawn to chests, whispering fragments of languages you half recognize but cannot grasp. Others stare out at the passing darkness, their breaths fogging the frost-laced windows, as if searching for a horizon that will never appear. You rub your eyes, and the fragments of a dream, or is it a memory, cling to you like cobwebs. In it, you see towering spires of white stone, gleaming under a sky alive with unnatural lights, not the sun or stars, but something electric, humming with promise. These were cities, weren't they? Vast metropolises of marble and brass, where fountains danced without water and machines whispered secrets to the wind. But then comes the rumble, deep and primordial, shaking the ground beneath your tiny feet. The earth heaves, and a tide of thick, unrelenting mud rises like a living thing, swallowing the bases of those magnificent towers, burying streets in a suffocating embrace. Screams echo, but they fade into gurgles as the brown deluge claims everything. Homes, libraries, the very people who built them. Your parents. They were there, weren't they? Tall figures in fine attire, laughing amid the glow of free energy that lit the nights like eternal day. But now, as the train jolts you forward, their faces dissolve into the muck, leaving only the echo of their voices in your pounding heart. This is no mere fancy, my friend. This is the essence of the Orphan trains, those enigmatic caravans that crisscross the American heartland from 1854 to 1929, ferrying over 200,000 children, like parcels across an indifferent land. Picture them, endless lines of little ones, bundled onto platforms in New York City, their belongings reduced to a single satchel or the clothes on their backs. They were sent westward, to farms and families unknown, in a program hailed by some as a beacon of humanitarian grace. The Children's Aid Society, founded by the compassionate Charles Loring Brace, sought to rescue these urchins from the squalor of urban tenements, the filthy alleys where disease and despair clung like shadows to every cobblestone. It was, in the eyes of history's chroniclers, a noble endeavour, plucking vulnerable souls from the jaws of poverty and placing them in the fresh air of rural America, where they might grow strong amid golden fields and sturdy barns. No importation from foreign shores, they say. These were the children of immigrants and the forgotten poor, American, born yet adrift in a tide of industrialization that swept parents into factories or graves. Yet, as we linger in this twilight of truth and tale, allow me to whisper a deeper layer, one that stirs the undercurrents of conspiracy and wonder. What if these trains were more than mere mercy missions? What if they carried not just the displaced, but the remnants of a shattered world, a world called Tartaria, that vast, elusive empire whispered about in the margins of old maps and the ravings of fringe historians. Tartaria, spanning from the steppes of Central Asia to the wilds of North America, a realm of architectural marvels and technologies that defy the crude timelines we are taught. Imagine it, free energy harvested from the ether, towers that pierced the clouds to draw power from the very air, cities where light flowed without wires or coal. And then, the reset, a cataclysmic event, perhaps in the 1600s, or swelling into the mud floods of the 1700s, where the adult architects of this golden age vanished into the earth itself, leaving behind a generation of traumatized young survivors. These children, our spectral passengers, bore the scars of that erasure. Not just the bruises of street life, but profound psychological wounds, night terrors of collapsing spires, mutterings in tongues that echoed ancient Tartar dialects, drawings scribbled in coal on carriage walls, depicting star maps and machines no Victorian child should know. Some spoke of the Great Swallowing, a biblical deluge, not of water, but of liquefied soil that entombed their elders overnight. Were they imported, these little ghosts, smuggled across oceans on vessels disguised as trade ships, their memories fogged by the trauma of relocation, or perhaps by subtler arts hypnotic suggestions administered in the shadowed holds to ensure silence? The conspiracy murmurs that the orphan trains were a covert repopulation scheme, orchestrated by shadowy elites to rebuild society on the bones of the old one, using these innocents as blank slates upon which to inscribe a new, controlled narrative. Their inherited memories, those genetic echoes of lost grandeur, posed a threat whispers of free energy that could upend the monopolies of steam and oil yet to come. The archives of the Children's Aid Society paint a far more grounded portrait. No grand importation, no veil of secrecy over exotic origins. These were the offspring of the Ellis Island waves, Irish, German, Italian families fractured by famine and factory toil. The Society's ledgers detail auctions not of souls, but of opportunities. Farmers in the Midwest selecting sturdy lads for chores, matrons choosing girls for domestic help. Psychological studies today, from the American Psychological Association, attribute the traumas to the very real horrors of separation post-traumatic stress, from abrupt uprooting akin to the echoes of wartime evacuations. No evidence of collective hypnosis or alien tongues, the strange drawings, likely the fertile imaginings of lonely minds, fueled by dime novels and overheard tales of explorers, and those muddled memories of grand cities? Perhaps the subconscious imprint of the very fairs we shall visit later, those glittering expos of 1893 Chicago, where orphans were paraded as symbols of progress, their eyes wide with the wonder of electric lights for the first time. Yet, even in this rational frame, anomalies persist, don't they? Like fireflies in the dusk, refusing to be fully dispelled. Reports from the era, tucked away in yellowed newspapers of the New York Times from the 1870s, describe children arriving with sketches of impossible architectures, vaulted halls with star-shaped windows, not unlike the buried basements of Chicago's mud flood relics. One boy, a lad named Elias from the 1884 convoy, etched maps of a metropolis called Area, with canals that matched no known river. Dismissed as fantasy by the placing agents, these artifacts vanished into attics or ash heaps. Coincidence, or the faint pulse of a truth too vast for ledgers? Science bids us skepticism, urging peer-reviewed geology over Gothic romance. Yet the human spirit yearns for the seam where fact frays into fable. As we let this hook sink deep into your reverie, dear one, consider, what if you, in that train car, clutched a crumpled drawing of your own, a blueprint of a tower that powered homes with whispers from the sky? Would you speak of it to the stern matron beside you, or bury it in the folds of your fear? Tonight's journey will unearth such questions, layer by layer, from the vanishing adults of the 1600s to the devouring muds of the 1700s, the world's fairs as veils of deception, and the swift demolition of wonders built to dazzle and disappear. Breathe with me now, in and out, letting the train's sway become your own. Feel the weight of that satchel on your lap, heavy with unspoken histories. The night outside the window thickens, stars pricking the velvet sky like forgotten jewels from a crown long lost. What secrets did those children carry into their new lives' farms where ploughs turned soil still warm with buried echoes? Did they ever, in quiet moments by the hearth, trace the outlines of phantom cities on frost-patterned glass? Or did the world, in its relentless march, grind those memories to dust, leaving only the faint ache of something profoundly amiss? In the chapters ahead, we shall follow it through the fog-shrouded villages of 17th-century Europe, where plagues masked deeper disappearances, into the churning bowels of mud floods that reshaped continents overnight, across the electric boulevards of world's fairs, where innocence was both exhibit and erasure, and finally, to the rubble of radiant cities, torn down not by time, but by design. But for now, linger with our young traveller. See him rise unsteadily as the train slows, the platform lights of some nameless prairie town spilling golden pools onto the wooden slats. Strangers wait there, kindly aunts with aprons starched white, gruff uncles with calloused hands extended in welcome. This one, they might say, pointing to you, he looks sturdy enough for the milking. And so you step down, the mud of the platform squelching underfoot, a harbinger of the floods to come. The train chugs onward without you, vanishing into the dark, taking its cargo of ghosts to distant fates. What becomes of such a soul? Does he thrive, folding his secrets into the rhythm of seasons, planting corn by day, dreaming of spires by night? Or does the trauma fester, blooming into tales told to his own children decades hence, tales that echo the very comment that summoned us here? Grandpa, what was the great swallowing? They might ask, and he, with eyes distant as forgotten maps, would murmur of mud that rose like judgment, of lights that danced without flame, of a world where adults built heavens and vanished into hells of their making. In this imagining, we touch the pulse of history's hidden heart, the resilience of the young, the fragility of truth. The orphan trains, benevolent or veiled, deposited seeds of mystery across a nation, their passengers unwitting bearers of a narrative fractured by catastrophe. Science assures us it was progress's price, the churn of migration in a young republic, yet the anomalies wink from the shadows, inviting us to question, were these children merely saved or salvaged from oblivion? Now, as the platform recedes into the haze behind you, let us turn our gaze to another soul from those iron-veined journeys, a girl named Clara, no more than 9 summers old, when the train deposited her on the frostbitten soil of a Kansas homestead in the autumn of 1872. Unlike the boy we left swaying in his compartment, Clara did not awaken to the jolt of motion. Hers was a quieter unravelling, a slow fraying that began not on the rails but in the dim-lit corners of the farmhouse where she was claimed. The couple who took her in sturdy folk, with wind-burned faces and hands rough from tilling endless acres, spoke of her arrival as a godsend, a pair of willing hands to mend the ache of their childless years. Yet from the first night, as the prairie winds howled like distant mourners, Clara's sleep became a battlefield, her small frame twisting beneath threadbare quilts, as if fleeing invisible pursuers. Her nightmares were not the stuff of childish fancy, those fleeting shadows of monsters under beds or storms that rattled shutters. No, Clara's visions clawed deeper, surfacing in fragments that she would murmur aloud in the pre-dawn hush, words tumbling from her lips like stones dislodged from a crumbling wall. The sky cracked open. She would gasp, her voice a thin thread in the silence, like glass under a hammer, and the lights poured out blue and silver, humming through the air like angry bees. Then came the sounds, relentless in their mechanical insistence, the grind of vast gears meshing in the earth, the whoosh of steam vents erupting from sidewalks that buckled and split, and beneath it all, a low thrum that vibrated in her bones, as if the world itself were a colossal engine sputtering towards silence. She would bolt upright, eyes wide but unseeing, clutching at the air as though grasping for threads of a torn tapestry, strands of memory that slipped away each time she reached. What haunted Clara most profoundly, however, was the absence woven into these reveries, the vanishing of faces she could almost name. In her dreams, crowds milled through boulevards, lined with edifices of impossible grace structures that soared on arches of filigreed iron, their domes catching the ether's glow without need of flame or fuse. Laughter echoed from these throngs, voices in a babble of tongues that blended English with something guttural and ancient, perhaps the rolling cadences of forgotten Siberian dialects. And there, amid the splendor, stood her kin, a father with ink-stained fingers sketching blueprints of towers that harvested lightning from clear skies, a mother whose songs summoned warmth from crystals embedded in walls. But as the sky fissured, the mud surged, a viscous wave that rose not in fury but with deliberate hunger, coiling around ankles, then waists, pulling the adults downward into a churning abyss. Clara, perched on a ledge too high for the tide, watched them submerge, their hands outstretched in silent pleas, until only bubbles marked their descent. She awoke, drenched in sweat, the echo of that thrum lingering in her ears, a phantom vibration that made the farmhouse timbers seem to pulse in sympathy. These episodes etched themselves into Clara's days, transforming the mundane into mirrors of the uncanny. A sudden rumble of thunder would send her scrambling under the kitchen table, convinced the heavens were splintering anew. The clank of the farmer's scythe against whetstone evoked the gears of her nocturnal machinery, freezing her mid-chore with a pallor that drained the colour from her cheeks. The matron of the house, a woman of practical piety who attributed such fits to city poisons still leaching from the blood, tried remedies drawn from almanacs and church elders, herbal tonics steeped in chamomile and valerian to soothe the nerves, bedtime recitations of psalms to ward off the devil's whispers. Yet nothing quelled the tide. Clara's drawings, etched furtively on scraps of feed sack with charred sticks, revealed glimpses of her inner tumult, jagged lines for the fractured firmament, swirling vortices for the encroaching mire, and in the foreground, clusters of stick-figure children adrift on rafts of debris, their eyes hollowed into voids that stared back with accusatory emptiness. Delve with me, if your mind allows, in this languid drift, into the underbelly of such afflictions, where the line between personal torment and collective shadow blurs like ink in rain. Whispers persist among those who pore over the frayed edges of history, scholars of the obscure and seekers of suppressed lore, that Clara's visions were no isolated delirium, but echoes of an orchestrated forgetting, a mass hypnosis enacted in the very spectacles meant to dazzle the masses. Consider the world's fairs, those colossal pageants of the late 19th century, not as mere celebrations of ingenuity, but as veiled theatres of erasure. In the shadow of Chicago's 1893 extravaganza, with its lagoons of imported swans and palaces of plaster that mimicked eternal marble, throngs of these orphaned voyagers were herded through exhibits of progress. Here, amid the whir of dynamos and the flicker of arc lights technologies pilfered, some claim, from the very Tartarian vaults they sought to bury attendants, in crisp uniforms guided the children through orientation halls, rooms disguised as wonder chambers but laced, perhaps, with subtle vapors or mesmeric lights designed to imprint obedience and obliterate the past. The theory unfurls like a forbidden scroll. These fairs served dual purpose, showcasing salvaged artifacts of the lost Empire wireless transmitters disguised as ornamental fountains, atmospheric engines masked as kinetic sculptures while simultaneously reprogramming their pint-sized witnesses. Hypnotic induction, administered under the guise of educational lectures or group sing-alongs, would weave suggestions into the subconscious. Your old world was a dream of fever. This new one is your truth. The children, already softened by the trauma of transit, absorbed these mandates like parched earth drinking rain, their recollections of Tartaria's boundless grids, cities where power flowed from atmospheric resonators, untrammeled by the greed of wired monopolies recast as childish delusions. Repurposed as chattel for the agrarian machine, they tilled fields and spun yarns of normalcy, their suppressed gnosis surfacing only in nocturnal fractures, as with Clara's ceaseless refrain of cracking skies and submerged elders. It was a elegant sleight, proponents murmur, ensuring the next generation laboured in ignorance, blind to the free energies that could shatter the chains of emerging industrial barons. And oh, the peculiar resonances that ripple from this hypothesis. like harmonics from a struck tuning fork. Among the descendants of these riders, patterns emerge that defy tidy explanation echoes of what modern parlance dubs the Mandela effect, though predating its coinage by generations. Families tracing lineages back to the trains recount shared misremembrances, grandparents insisting on sky cities that floated above the prairies, siblings debating the existence of whispering walls in homesteads, long demolished, all converging on visions of aerial metropolises that textbooks swear never graced the firmament. One such lineage, documented in a faded ledger from a Missouri reunion in 1925, describes a cluster of aunts who, in unison during a harvest feast, sketched identical diagrams of levitating spires structures with anti-gravitic coils that matched no known blueprint, yet mirrored anomalies unearthed in Siberian digs, where Tartarian remnants allegedly lie petrified under permafrost. Was this collective amnesia bleeding through, a glitch in the hypnotic matrix where forbidden architectures intruded upon the sanctioned script of history? Yet, as we navigate these labyrinthine suppositions, let us anchor ourselves with the ballast of empirical scrutiny, lest the thrill of conjecture sweep us into uncharted voids. Contemporary psychology, drawing from the annals of the American Psychological Association, frames Clara's agonies and those of her fellow passengers as textbook manifestations of post-traumatic stress disorder, forged in the crucible of abrupt exile rather than esoteric rites. The orphan trains, for all their veneer of benevolence, inflicted a severance as sharp as any scalpel, uprooting fledglings from urban nests, only to transplant them into alien soils where accents mocked and customs clashed. Studies of survivor testimonies reveal a spectrum of responses. Some blossomed into resilient stewards of the land, their scars internalized as quiet fortitude. Others, like Clara, externalized the breach through somatic symphonies, where thunder mimicked cataclysm and machinery evoked loss. No arcane gases in the fairgrounds, no cabal of mesmerists, merely the raw alchemy of human fragility, where migration's dislocations birthed hallucinations as vivid as any engineered trance. Historical accounts corroborate this, painting the children not as pawns in a grand occlusion, but as inadvertent cargo, shuttled like crates of grain across state lines, their psyches frayed by the indifference of the era's rescue paradigm. The mental frailties, including those etched by prior epidemics like diphtheria's lingering fog, compounded the toll, turning nights into sieves through which unbidden fragments sifted. Still, the discrepancies tease, refusing to dissolve entirely under the solvent of science. Clara's journals tattered volumes she began at 12, after learning letters from a kindly schoolmarm bristle with entries that align uncannily with subterranean discoveries unearthed decades later. Passages evoking mud veins thick as rivers, cradling halls of starlit glass presage, the 1,930 seconds excavations in Midwestern basements, where mudflood strata entombed chambers with star-patterned vaults, artifacts dismissed by archaeologists as eccentric follies of a bygone boom. How did a waif from the trains intuit such geometries? Her quill tracing motifs that echoed engravings from forbidden folios of Tartarian cartography. Coincidence? The rationalist counters, a confluence of overheard lore from newsprint and nursery rhymes. Yet the precision lingers, a splinter in the mind's eye, urging us to peer closer at the palimpsest of the past. Envision Clara in her later years, a grandmother now, her hands gnarled as old roots, recounting these veiled vigils to wide-eyed kin around a flickering lantern. The farm has passed to others, the prairie tamed into grids of wheat, but her gaze, when it drifts to the horizon, still seeks the fracture points in the dusk places where the veil might thin, allowing a glimpse of the humming blue beyond. Her descendants, poring over those journals in attics thick with dust, feel the pull of inheritance, not just blood, but the weight of unspooled threads, memories that migrate like birds across generations, alighting in dreams unbidden. One great niece, in a letter penned during the lean years of the 1,930 seconds, confesses to visions of her own gears grinding beneath the dust bowl's pall, skies rent by dust, devils that whisper of elder cataclysms, mirroring the media's own uneasy revival of orphan lore after decades of deliberate quietude. Were Clara's voids the birth pangs of a suppressed epoch, or merely the echoes of a century's cruelties, amplified by isolation's cruel acoustics? Whisper back in the comments if you're still with me. What corner of the world are you tuning in from tonight? And what does the clock say there as the ground begins to stir? Let us pivot now, as if flipping the brittle pages of a long-sealed expedition log, its leather binding cracked from centuries of damp neglect, to the raw underbelly of the earth itself, those insidious surges that reshaped skylines, not with flame or fury, but with a patient, inexorable creep. Picture a surveyor from the Tsarist era, one Ivan Petrovich, dispatched in the bitter chill of October 1812 to chart the ravaged fringes of Moscow, his boots caked in the aftermath of what chronicles dare call a mere inundation, though whispers among his peers branded it something far more voracious. Not the infamous blaze that gutted the Kremlin's golden spires that September. Oh no, that conflagration was a human pyre, sparked by retreating Muscovites to deny Napoleon's Grande Armée its plunder, reducing 3/4 of the wooden city to ash and claiming 12,000 souls in the smoke. But Petrovich's quill trembled over a subtler scourge, the Moksha River's swollen wrath, unleashed by autumnal downpours that turned tributaries into torrents, swelling the capital's veins with a slurry not of water alone, but of silt-laden sludge that clawed at foundations like fingers from the grave. In his fragmented entries salvaged, they say, from a satchel sunk in the very mire he described, Petrovich recounts the advance, how the deluge began as a murmur, rain pattering on the thatched roofs of Kitai-Gorod, like impatient drummers, then escalating into a roar that drowned the cries of the displaced. By the third dawn, the earth betrayed its wards. Streets once cobbled with pride sank beneath a tide of ochre, brown ooze, viscous and unrelenting, that rose knee-high in the merchant quarters and waist-deep near the Moskva's bends. It was no crystal flood of biblical fancy, but a beast of clay and gravel, churned from upstream eroding banks and funneled by the city's haphazard sprawl. Petrovich wades through it in his mind's eye, his plumb line vanishing into the muck, measuring depths that mocked his instruments 10 feet in places where maps swore solid ground, swallowing cellars whole and exhaling the foetor of rot from ruptured sewers, carriages overturned like felled oaks, their wheels mired in what he likened to the hand of Gaia, clenched in secret grievance, dragging the unwary toward unseen chasms. But herein lies the first fracture in the facade of fortuity, the chink where curiosity pries open the vault of the veiled. What if this was no capricious climate tantrum, no seasonal spite of the steppes, but the echo of a engineered cataclysm, a deliberate inundation orchestrated to inter the remnants of something grander, more luminous than the Tsar's flickering court? Petrovich's log hints at anomalies amid the slop, fragments of masonry unearthed not from medieval digs, but pristine as yesterday's quarries, bearing motifs of interlocking stars and parabolic arcs that no Muscovite mason of the age would deign to carve. These were, in the fevered cartography of the fringe, relics of Tartaria, that sprawling, spectral dominion said to have blanketed Eurasia from the Caspian's cradle to the Pacific's rim, a nexus of ingenuity where spires of obsidian and brass pierced the veil between earth and ether. Envision it through the lens of the suppressed. Tartaria as a harmonious hegemony, its metropolises humming with atmospheric engines, tall antennal towers that siphoned electricity from the ionosphere, powering boulevards aglow without the tyranny of coal or copper wire, illuminating academies where scholars communed with frequencies beyond the audible spectrum. Cities like a prelapsarian Moscow, not the wooden tinderbox of 1812 lore, but a Tartarian jewel of vaulted halls and subterranean grids, where free energy coursed like blood through veins of crystal conduit. The reset, then the mud flood as harbinger of erasure, unfolds in this shadowed syllabus as a symphony of sabotage. Proponents of the hypothesis, piecing together postcards from oblivion and anomalies in architectural archives, posit that around the turn of the 19th century, a cabal of nascent imperialists, perhaps, the Romanovs in league with emergent Western syndicates, unleashed a global liquefaction. Not mere rain, but manipulated hydrology, damming upstream confluences to hoard meltwaters from the thawing permafrost, then breaching them in orchestrated cascades, liquefying topsoils into a planetary paste that buried the old order under 20-30 feet of sterile sediment. Moscow 1812 becomes the overture, the Mokshas surge, a test case. Swallowing Tartarian substructures hold their energy, resonators crushed into conductive slurry, their libraries of ley line lore pulped into impermeable clay. Why? To reboot the ledger, expunging a paradigm of abundance that threatened the scarcity economies of steam and sovereignty. The adults, stewards of this sylvan science, perish in the plunge, their progeny scattered as the orphans we've shadowed, their knowledge diluted into folklore and faint engravings on basement lintels. Petrovich's observations fuel this fire of fancy. Amid the dredge, he notes veins of peculiar alloy, glints of iridescent metal snagged in his grapple, neither iron nor tin, but a lightweight lattice that hummed faintly when struck, defying the corrosion that should have claimed it eons prior. Reports from the diggers he marshalled echo this eeriness. Shovels striking not bedrock, but hollow vaults echoing with the drip of trapped air, yielding shards of what resembled filigreed antennae, twisted yet unyielding, as if forged to channel tempests rather than withstand them. One labourer, a grizzled Cossack with a scar like a lightning bolt across his brow, swore the mud tasted of thunder, spitting out flecks that sparked on his tongue hallucination, perhaps born of fever from the fetid brew, or harbinger of hyperconductive residues from dismantled Tartarian grids. These strange metals, as the log dubs them, vanish from the record, requisitioned, one supposes, by the Kremlin's cartographers, melted into mundane armaments or archived in vaults where sunlight fears to tread. Yet, as we sift these sediments of speculation, let the geologist's gavel fall with measured mercy, tempering the torrent of tantalizing what-ifs with the strata of verifiable vein. The United States Geological Survey, in its compendia of cataclysmic cascades, attributes such inundations to the prosaic poetry of precipitation and physiography, prolonged deluges saturating soils until they surrender to saturation, rivers engorged by snowmelt or squalls that swell tributaries into tantrums. For Moscow's 1812 mire, the Moksha's mischief aligns with a confluence of climes, an unusually sodden equinox, exacerbated by the scorched earth exodus that stripped the land of absorptive thatch, funneling runoff into urban funnels. No nefarious nozzles or nocturnal breaches, merely the Moscow basin's basine, like basin, a low-lying lattice of loam, prone lowlands prone to periodic pooling, as evidenced in sediment cores that layer such events every few decades without apocalyptic punctuation. The peculiar alloys? Likely misidentified mundanities, galvanized scraps from early telegraph trials or brass fittings from French loot, oxidized into optical illusions by the slurry's sulphurous kiss. And the echoing vaults, pragmatic cellars, half sunk by subsidence as the city's weight compressed compressible clays, a phenomenon replicated in Chicago's own 19th century slumps, where lakefront levees lagged behind land's lazy leveling. Parallel these particulars to the American analog, where the mud flood meme metastasizes most memorably. Chicago, 1,850 seconds, its nascent avenues asphyxiated by a similar seep from the Chicago River's caprice, bloated by prairie downpours that dissolved dunes into dough. USGS annals archive it as archetype extreme extrication from excessive efflux, where glacial till turned traitorous under torrent, entombing basements but birthing no buried Babylon. The buried windows, those beguiling basements now at street level, engineering expedients, excavated post-flood to elevate the grade, jacking structures on screwjacks in a civic sleight that's salvaged rather than shrouded. No elite engineered eclipse, just the gritty graft of a growing gridiron, where mud was foe, not facade. Still, the stubborn scintillations persist, don't they? Petrovich's humming lattice, for instance, dismissed in dispatches as delirium, yet corroborated in cursory contemporary correspondences, like a dispatch from a Viennese envoy noting anomalous conductors salvaged from the sludge, auctioned discreetly to Frankfurt foundries. Or consider the cartographic conundrums. Pre-1812 maps of Muscovy, redacted in revisions, that delineate districts with densities defying demolition quarters, quartered by keys that quartered the quagmire, yet persist in subterranean surveys as phantom phalanxes. The Tartarian tapestry, though tarred as pseudo-historical phantasmagoria born in Russian revanchism and Reddit rabbit holes, tugs at threads too taut to snap. Why do seismic profiles beneath Red Square reveal rhythmic resonances, as if ribbed by resonators long rusted? Why do folk etymologies from Siberian shamans speak of sky suckers, toppled by Earth's angry vomit, predating the flood by folklore's foggy filigree? Enlarge the lens, and the pattern proliferates, from the sepia, slicked Seattle of 1893, where a 6-foot slurry from Lake Washington's laps liquefied lumber barons' legacies, unearthing urns of unclassifiable ore that hummed under hammer, to the sepulchral Seattle of 1910, pivot to the global glyph, contemporaneous chronicles from Calcutta's 1838 deluge, where Hooghly's hug turned hovels to Hades, disgorging Doric doorframes from depths that dated to no dynasty. Each episode, etched in expedition ephemera, exhales an essence of excess mud, not as messenger, but as mausoleum, entombing an epoch where energy was etheric, unbound by the bottlenecks of baronage. Query the quiescence. If these were mere meteorological misdemeanors, why the meticulous muting in municipal memory? Why do municipal manuals of Moscow elide the Moksha's 1812 malice, folding it into the fire's fiery footnote, while whispers in White Sea wharves warn of the great smoothing, a silting that scoured scripts and scorched scrolls? The conspiracy cascades thus, a covert continuum, where mud was the medium of monopoly, masking the mudras of a mudra-free world, Tartaria's tenet of transmission, where Tesla's later transmissions were tardy echoes, cribbed from cadaverous codices clawed from the clay. Geology demurs, of course, with data as its dirge, core samples from the Moscow basin, bored by post-Soviet seismologists, layer the 1812 event as lacustrine lamina, unremarkable in its uniformity silt from Silurian shales, no exotic embeds, no harmonic husks. The strange metals dissolve under spectrometry to base brasses, their hum a harmonic hallucination from hydrogen sulfide's hiss. Yet the yield of yielding ground lingers as litmus. Why elevate entire esplanades post-deluge, as in Chicago's 1858 uplift, burying bow windows not in cataclysm, but in calculated camouflage? Was it reclamation or redaction? As Petrovich's log lapses into lacunae, his final flourish, a frantic flourish of the hand, closes, and the light flees. We feel the fascicles fold, the flood's faint afterimage imprinting on imagination. What if the mire was midwife to modernity, birthing our bottlenecked bazaars from the womb of a wireless wonderland, or merely Mother Nature's mundane massage, kneading the knolls into kneecaps? The ambiguity aches, an itch in the intellect, urging us onward through the ooze, toward the spectral survivors who clawed from its clasp the vanishing vanguard of the 17th century, their absence a prelude to this planetary purge. Now, imagine the fog rolling in off the Pacific like a conspirator's cloak, thick and cloying, as it did on that fateful April morning in 1906, when the ground beneath San Francisco decided to confess its buried sins. But let us not retrace the tremors, or the inferno's roar. Those tales are etched in every school primer, a cacophony of cracked spires and fleeing shadows. Instead, slip with me into the quieter aftermath, the sifting through rubble where the real riddles emerge, not in flames but in the cold gleam of unearthed bone. Envision a lone figure, a coroner's assistant named Elias Crow, a man with ink-stained cuffs and eyes hollowed by lantern light, poring over a makeshift morgue in Golden Gate Park, where canvas tents billowed like ghosts against the acrid haze. Crow's ledger, yellowed and water-warped, survives in fragments, tucked away in the Bancroft Library's dim vaults, a testament to the unheralded grim reapers of calamity. His entries begin not with the quake's 7.9 magnitude shudder felt from Oregon to Nevada, rupturing 296 miles of the San Andreas Fault, but with the peculiar payloads, it disgorged from the Earth's reluctant maw. As crews with picks and shovels clawed at the liquefied lots of the Mission District, where bay mud turned treacherous under the seismic kiss, they hauled up not just the fresh fallen miners and merchants in their nightshirts, charred by the dynamite-fueled fires that claimed 28,000 structures, but strata of the spectral, skeletons stacked like forgotten cordwood, adults whose flesh had long surrendered to soil, their garments pristine in ways that mocked the march of time. One dispatch, scrawled in haste on April 22nd, reads, "From the crater at 14th and Valencia, 3 cadavers exhumed at 8 feet depth, attire of broadcloth coats and cravats, no rot upon the weave, as if interred yesterday, yet bones brittle as autumn leaves, faces frozen in repose, no mark of violence, save the mud's indelible stain." What Crow catalogued in those fevered weeks over 3,000 official dead, though whispers from relief workers like those in the California Historical Society's archives tallied closer to 6,000, with unreported masses shoveled into mass graves, were not mere victims of the '06 cataclysm, but harbingers from a deeper chasm. These were the vanished elders, the adults who evaporated from the ledgers of the 1600s, their re-emergence a rude interruption to the narrative of progress. Picture the scene through Crow's jaded gaze. A trench yawned open like a fault line in flesh, revealing a chamber not of redwood and rubble, but of compacted clay, laced with veins of vitrified sandglass from heat beyond hearths, perhaps, or the flash of some primordial fury. From this sepulchre spilled the bodies, 24 strong, clad in velvets and leathers that evoked the courts of Charles II, not the gaslit grit of Teddy Roosevelt's America. Lace cuffs unfrayed, boot heels polished to a gleam unmarred by decades, and here the ledger falters, ink blotting, as if the pen recoiled one gentleman with a brass locket fused to his sternum, its interior etched with circuits finer than spider silk, glinting under the coroner's probe like forbidden circuitry. Ah, but it is in these glints that the intrigue ignites, a slow-burning fuse leading us from the mundane morgue to the madhouse of hypothesis. What if these were no quake-quenched contemporaries, but the entombed architects of Tartaria, their forms preserved in the anaerobic kiss of mud floods that spanned centuries, not seasons? The theory coils like smoke from a suppressed ember. These floods, recurrent rifts in the planet's skin, are not isolated inundations but refrains of a grander dirge, the Younger Dryas echo, that 12,000-year-old cataclysm when a comet's kin splintered the ice sheets, unleashing megafloods that scoured the globe and reset the board of civilizations. Proponents, huddled in online occult octaves and fringe folios, liken the 1906 disgorgement to a tardy tremor of that cosmic coup, a micro, Dryas, where solar flares or subterranean shifts liquefied the lithosphere, burying Tartarian metropolises in layers of loess that mimicked millennia. The adults unearthed? Elite engineers of an etheric age. Their implants, those locket-like anomalies, perhaps neural interfaces or harmonic resonators tuned to atmospheric ether testaments to a tech that harvested harmonics from the hum of creation itself. Crow's locket, vanished from evidence lockers, requisitioned, rumor has it, by Pinkerton agents with ties to Edison's grid, bore engravings of helical coils, akin to the suppressed patents of Steinmetz, who murmured of buried blueprints in his later ravings. Delve deeper into this detective's den of disquiet, and the anomalies accumulate like dust motes in a sunbeam. A second cache, from the Fillmore Street fissures, yielded a matron in corseted silk, dated to the Restoration by its fleur-de-lis brocade. Yet her finger bones clutched a vial of iridescent fluid, sealed with a stopper of what assayed as non-ferrous alloy, lighter than aluminum, humming faintly when tapped against bone china. Nearby, a cluster of 5 labourers by their calices, but attired in doublets of damask that screamed 1,652 London lay arrayed, as if in council, their skulls indented, not by quake, but by precise perforations, as from trephining tools of antique design, perhaps to excise memories too potent or implant etheric enhancers. These were the vanished vanguard, the 1600s progenitors whose abrupt absence left Europe echoing with orphan wails, swallowed by an early mud pulse, perhaps the Little Ice Age's hidden hydra. They slumbered until the '06 upheaval punched through the palimpsest, exhaling their secrets in a belch of bay silt. The Younger Dryas linkage lends this lurid lore a veneer of veiled verisimilitude. That stadial snap from 12900 to 11600 BCE, when mammoths flash froze mid-meal and Clovis cultures crumbled, is pinned by impact zealots on extraterrestrial ejecta, nanodiamonds and spherules strewn in sediments worldwide, proof of airbursts that vaporized ice caps and vitrified valleys. Conspiracy cartographers extend this to a cyclic curse. Every 1200 years or so, the tail of some errant comet clips our orbit, triggering telluric tides that turn topsoil to tsunami, resetting rogue realms like Tartaria, that mud-masked mudra of mud-free mastery, where adults wielded wands of wireless wonder, only to be walled in by the world's willful amnesia. San Francisco's spew, then, becomes a belated burp from this belly of the beast. The 1906 quake, magnitude be damned, cracked a capsule from the 1600 surge, spilling stewards whose tech grafts, subdermal spirals for sinking with star song, or so the shamans of speculation sing, outshone our own sputtering sparks. Why else the clothing's chronological chasm? Velvets unvanquished by vermin, leathers supple as fresh tannery, defying the decay that should have devoured them in a century's churn. Crow's confidential coda, slipped to a sympathetic scribe in the San Francisco Call's bowels, frets over the fate of these finds. The brass-bound one, with its whirl within, was whisked to Washington by rail, under War Department seal destination, perhaps. The Smithsonian's shadowed stacks, where anomalies atrophy in alcoves unvisited. The matron's vial, shattered in transit, its elixir evaporating like a sigh, leaving only the scent of ozone and regret. Whispers from the wire pullers, echoed in later exposés like those from the Mudflood manifestos, suggest a swift sanitization. Bodies burned en masse in the Potrero pyres, not to stem plague, though bubonic shadows did stalk the survivors, as in the 1907 outbreak, but to smother the scandal of anachronistic anatomy. The implants? Melted into medals for the elite, their harmonics harvested to hasten the handover from free ether to fettered filaments, ensuring Edison's empire eclipsed Tesla's tantalizing transmissions. Yet, as we chase these chimeric clues through the coroner's crepuscular confessions, let the lantern of learning cast its clarifying cone, dispersing the fog of fancy with the fine mesh of fact. The unearthed elders of '06 were, in the unyielding verdict of forensics and fault-line forensics, contemporaries cruelly claimed by the convulsion itself no time-travelling Tartarians, but unfortunates from the city's underbelly, their preservation a parlour trick of the peninsula's peculiar podology. Bay mud, that silty soup of marine sediments and organic ooze, acts as an anoxic archive, sealing corpses in a shroud of low-oxygen lethargy, where bacteria balk and break down stalls much like the bog bodies of Europe, but baked by California's seismic oven into impromptu mummies. The clothing conundrum? No chronological coup, but a cascade of cultural confluence. San Francisco's sartorial scene, a polyglot pastiche of Pacific imports and European echoes, layered wardrobes in ways that blurred era's velvet vests from Victorian holdovers, lace from immigrant trunks, unpacked mere moons before the quake. Eyewitness epistles, like those archived by the USGS and the Museum of the City of San Francisco, describe the dig's unearthing not ancients, but artisans and argonauts from the gold rush's grafted grafts. A French haberdasher in frock coat, his shop cellar, a sinkhole since the '49 boom. A Portuguese longshoreman in leather jerkin, imported garb from the Azores, unrotted by the mud's microbial moratorium. As for the implants and vials, science serves a sterner summons. Optical outliers, born of the brain's bid to impose order on outrage. Crow's locket, likely a Masonic medallion or medical lancet case, its circuits mere chasing decorative filigree, common in fraternal finery of the Gilded Age, humming from residual static in the quake's electromagnetic aftershock. The vial's elixir, laudanum or liniment, staples in every apothecary's satchel, its alloy a mere alembic of antimony, lightweight for the labourer's pouch. The younger Dryas dalliance dissolves under scrutiny too, while the impact hypothesis tantalizes with its trove of micro-craters and mammoth ivory etched by cosmic kiss, linking it to 19th century slumps, strains the sinews of synchrony. No iridium spikes in Bay Area boreholes, no nano-diamond dust in the debris, just the garden-variety geology of a subduction zone sneeze. Sediment stratigraphy from the 1906 excavations, pored over by post-quake paleontologists like those at the California Academy of Sciences, layers the anomalies as alluvial accidents silt from the Pleistocene percolating up through fault fractures, mingling modern marrow with mammoth-era mulch, but no reset refrain, merely the mosaic of millions of years mashed in a moment. Still, the stubborn seduction endures, doesn't it? Those perforations on the skulls dismissed as dental decay or dueling dents align too neatly with trepanation traditions from Tartarian-tinged tomes, holes drilled to let the hum escape, as one suppressed Siberian scroll suggests. And the vitrified veins in the clay? Not volcanic vent vomit, but perhaps the flash fossil of etheric overload, when resonators ruptured in the reset's rage. Crow's blotched blotter begs the question, if these were mere mishaps of mud and magnitude, why the midnight manifests? The manifests that marshaled militias to monitor the morgues, ensuring no snapshots slip to the society pages? Why do the Bancrofts' basements brim with bundled broadsheets, redacted reports of bodies out of epoch, their edges singed as if scorched by more than mere mishap? In the hush of this half-light inquiry, where bone meets conjecture in a tango of the tenuous, we glimpse the glue that binds the '06 ghosts to the 1600s voids, a pattern of preservation that preserves the puzzle, inviting us to intuit the invisible. Were these adults avatars of an age asphyxiated by artifice, their tech tendrils a threat to the timeline's tidy tyranny, or figments forged from the forge of fear, the human hunger to haunt the horizontal with hints of the hieratic? The ambiguity, like the aftershock's faint frisson, fades into the fabric of your forming dreams, urging a gentle glide toward the next notch in our nocturnal notch, the 17th century's silent scourge, where plagues were, but the prologue to a vanishing act, vast and vexing. If these unearthed echoes have stirred something quiet in your evening, perhaps a gentle nudge to subscribe to Mystery History for Sleep, so more whispers like this find their way to you. Or just share a thought below on what the mud might still be hiding in your own corner of the world. Your words keep the lantern lit for us all. Let us unfurl now, like the brittle vellum of a monk's illuminated manuscript, a chorus of voices from the shadowed vales of 17th century Europe. Not a single tale, but a polyphony of pauses, where the wind through abandoned eaves carries confessions too faint for the bold historian's quill. Begin with the itinerant friar, Brother Anselm of the Order of the Black Cross, whose Pilgrim's Codex, preserved in the dusty scriptorium of Bamberg, records his traverse of the Franconian wilds in the autumn of 1634, when the 30 Years' War had gnawed the Holy Roman Empire to a skeleton of splintered principalities. Anselm's ink, faded to the hue of dried blood, describes a hamlet near Würzburg, its thatched roofs sagging like weary eyelids over windows devoid of light. Upon the eve of All Saints, I crested the ridge of the Tauber Valley, expecting the clamour of harvest vespers and the scent of rye bread baking against the chill. Instead, silence reigned, profound as the void between matins and lauds. The church bell hung mute in its tower, its rope frayed and fallen to the nave floor, where pews lay askew as if shoved by spectral hands. Doors stood ajar, hinges unrusting, and within the low-beamed cottages, hearths cold these 3 winters past, with pots still hung on hooks, their contents congealed to husks. No bodies bloated in the byres, no crows pecking at the unburied, merely the absence, a hollowness that echoed my footfalls back at me threefold. The well bucket bobbed empty, and on its rim, a child's slate, etched with a crude sun, and the word Papa, yet no child to claim it, no parent to mourn. This was no isolated elegy. Anselm's path, veering southward to evade Swedish foragers, threaded through a lacework of desolation. Villages like Rothenburg ob der Tauber, spared the sack but starved of souls, their market squares barren, save for wind-tumbled leaves and the occasional boot print, as if the populace had risen en masse and marched into the mist. The war, that hydra-headed heresy from 1618 to 1648, had birthed such voids not through blade alone, but through the pestilential train it towed typhus and trench fever, blooming in the wake of marauding armies. Their camps, cesspools of contagion that seeped into the soil like ink into parchment. From 1634 to 1639, plague cycles ravaged Germany anew, claiming not clusters but kingdoms of the quick. Estimates whisper of a third of the empire's 8 million souls spirited away, leaving fields fallow and forges silent. Anselm notes the elite's evasion, those dukes and divines who fled to fortified abbeys, their longevity a luxury of leeches and laudanum, basic physic that nudged the span of noble lives from the 40s to the 50s, while peasants perished en masse. Shift the lens now to a crone's croon, preserved in the oral annals of Bohemian bards, as relayed in the 1672 folklore compendium of Václav Hanka, who gathered tales from the plague-scoured plains near Prague. Here speaks old Mother Zuzana, her voice gravelly as the Vltava's bed after flood. In the year the Whitecoats came with their pikes and their prayers, 'twas 1620, when the Protestants fell at the White Mountain, the menfolk went to the fields one dawn, axes on shoulders for the Yule logs, and by vespers the hearths were cold. No trumpet of return, no lantern bobbing on the hill path. We women waited through the equinox rains, calling names into the fog till our throats cracked like dry clay. Then the fevers found us, buboes swelling like forbidden fruit under arms and groins. But 'twas not the Black Death's bite alone. Nay, the air hummed with a wrongness, a low drone like bees in a hollow tree, and lights danced on the horizon globes of fire, red as judgment, dipping low over the birches as if supping on the souls they shepherded away. Zuzana's lament weaves in the war's warp and weft. The Battle of White Mountain, a Protestant rout that unleashed Catholic reprisals, famine's skeletal grip, and typhus's fevered flourish, mortality quadrupling in the Low Countries by 1636. Yet her globes of fire flicker with a fiercer flame, igniting the tinder of the uncanny. These were no willow, the wisps of marsh gas, but harbingers from the heavens, sightings that stud the 17th century skies like errant constellations. Consider the Nuremberg broadsheet of 1561, a woodcut frenzy depicting cylinders and spheres clashing in aerial melee over the city walls, cannon-like orbs spewing smoke, crashing into the dawn like fallen seraphs, chronicled not as fantasy but as eyewitness eschaton. Echoes resound in Stralsund, 1665, where fishermen's logs log a vast ship of flame hovering over the Baltic, its portholes pulsing within a fire, vanishing with a thunderclap that felled oaks a league inland. Zuzana's lights? Perhaps kin to the 1685 Scottish sighting, a fiery chariot scything the firmament near Leith, witnessed by burghers who etched its sigil in kirk ledgers ovoid, radiant, trailing vaporous veils. From these spectral sparks leaps the leap of lore. What if the vanishing was no viral vogue or martial moor, but the inaugural reset, a celestial cull, orchestrated by ancient overseers, their chariots of etheric alloy descending to excise the adult intellects that teetered too close to forbidden thresholds? The conspiracy, a phantom filament spun from the phantom time hypothesis that medieval millennium from 614 to 911 AD was a fabricated fog, conjured by Holy Roman charlatans to crown Otto III, extends its tendrils to the 17th, positing a parallel purge. Here, the UFOs are not interlopers but interveners, guardians of a galactic game board, deploying directed energy deluges or harmonics to dissolve the discerning scholars and smiths who, in the war's forge, stumbled upon Tartarian echoes, blueprints for boundless power, gleaned from buried codices or star-shot inspirations. Adults, bearers of this burgeoning gnosis, are erased not by pestilence but by plasma pulses, their forms vaporized or veiled in veils of illusion, leaving villages as vacant stages. The children? Spared as seed stock, their minds malleable, unmarred by the maturity that invites the beam traumatized. Yes, but primed for reprogramming by the rising regents who repopulate with imported innocence, blind to the beams that birthed their blankness. Envision the mechanics through the mad marginalia of a Jesuit savant, Father Gregorio Ricci, whose 1,642 treatises on aerial phantoms and divine chastisements, shelved in the Vatican's forbidden stacks, dissects such descents as demonic diversions or, in the fringe gloss, extraterrestrial edicts. Ricci recounts a Hessian hamlet in 1632, the soldiery of Tilly encamped without, their cannon cold, when a silver saucer, broad as a bishop's barge, alighted in the meadow, its hum halting hearts mid-beat. From its flanks unfolded figures tall and tenebrous, cloaked in light that bent the blades of grass. They beckoned the elders, the miller, the magistrate, the alchemist brewing elixirs from war-won weeds into its maw, and with a sigh like sighing stars, it ascended, leaving the young to wail in the wheat. By morrow, the tents of troops stood empty too, their commanders claimed by the same summons, the field furrowed not by feet but by faint scorch marks, circular as the eye of God in wrath. This vignette, though tinctured with Ricci's theological tint, aligns with the war's wasteland, the 30 years' carnage, a confessional conflagration that halved populations in hotspots like Pomerania, where famine and flux felled families wholesale. Typhus, that louse-born lurker, thrived in the trenches, its epidemics equivalent to the Black Death's bite in localized lashes. Yet the scorch marks scorch the skepticism. Aerial anomalies pepper the period's pamphlets. From the 1566 Basel blaze, black spheres dueling dawn over the Rhine, to the 1633 Gloucestershire globes, fiery carts carving contrails that curdled milk in barns below. Conspiracy cartographers connect these to a tech cull. As Europe edged toward enlightenment, Galileo's gaze grinding lenses, Bacon's beacons of method, the old guardians, perhaps Atlantean automatons or Anunnaki avatars, activated ancestral arrays to abort the ascent, zapping savants whose synapses sync too swiftly with suppressed sciences. The reset's residue? Empty enclaves, orphans orphaned not by orphans' trains but by orbital orphan sweepers, their beams bypassing the young to preserve a pliable populace for the phoenix of absolutism. Now, interlace a labourer's litany from the lips of one Peter van der Meer, a Dutch dike-mender whose verse, scrawled on peat-stained vellum and archived in Leiden's Low Country law, laments the lowlands' loss in 1640. The polders pumped dry by windmills' wheeze, yet the folk fled faster than the flood fathers, fording the fog at first light, tools trailing from hands gone limp, as globes glowed gold above the Gouda groves. Mothers clutched babes to breast, but the light lanced long, lingering on the learned, the leech with his lancets, the loom, master with his looms. By noon, naught but nests of nettles in the nave, the young yowling in yards, their elders evaporated like mist at matins. The war's wolves wandered wide, but 'twas the watchers from the welkin who winnowed the wise. Vandermeer's metrics mask a mire of mortality. The Dutch Republic, though spared the sack, suffered surges in the 1630s plague waves, intertwined with the 80 Years' War's spillover, where civilian tolls topped 20% in sieged sectors. Basic balms, quinine quaffs from New World imports. Rudimentary rinses bolstered burger lifespans, edging elites past 50 while the indigent idled in unmarked graves. The globes, grounded in the era's ether, ball lightning or auroral arcs, amplified by the Maunder minimum's magnetic mischief, that solar slump from 1645 to 1715 that dimmed days and danced displays. Yet the yarn unravels into wonder. If these were mere meteors or miasmas, why the selective silence? Why do parish rolls register resets entire adult rosters redacted between Easter and Epiphany, as in the 1629 Palmer plague famine, where mortality mantled the missing? The phantom time's shadow looms larger. If centuries were conjured, might vanishings be veiled erasures? UFOs, the ushers of a unified field theory too soon for scribes. Ricci's tenebrous figures, tall, as in the 1561 Nuremberg men in cylinders, their cloaks coruscating with craft unknown. The 17th shroud war's wounds, plague's pall cloaks, a canvas of curiosity. Adults absent not by accident, but by arcane appointment, their exodus engineered by entities eternal, or merely the millennium's merciless math, mortality's mundane multiplication. Breathe in the scent of damp moss and distant rain, feel the cool kiss of evening air on your skin, and follow me along a path that isn't quite there, a trail of faintly luminous prints, small and bare, pressing into the loamy earth of an English meadow that defies its own calendar. These are the steps of the improbable, the ones who strayed from the script of seasons, leading us not forward or back, but askew into the riddle of the green children, those emerald enigmas of Woolpit, whose tale blooms from the 12th century, yet casts long shadows into the orphan-haunted hush of the 1600s. The first print glows softly under the half-moon, just beyond the gnarled elbow of an ancient oak, its bark etched with runes that might be scars from forgotten storms, or the idle scratches of fey fingers. You pause here, as if the earth itself hesitates, and the air thickens with the murmur of harvest chaff stirred by a breeze too deliberate to be chance. Woolpit, Suffolk, a name that rolls like a stone skipped across still water, evoking the woolen cloaks of shepherds and the pit where bells toll for the lost. It was here, in the reign of King Stephen's fractious 12th century, when barons brawled for crowns and the land groaned under the weight of unquiet kings, that the impossible announced itself not with thunder, but with the rustle of strange garments in the wheat. Reapers, their scythes dulled by the day's toil, heard it first, a faint, piping cry, like the call of fledglings fallen from a nest too high to climb. Pushing through the golden stalks, they emerged into a dell ringed by thorns, where the sun slanted low and strange, illuminating two figures huddled against a stile, a boy and a girl, siblings by the clasp of their hands, their forms slight as willow switches, and their skin the verdant hue of new leaves unfurled in secret. No blood flushed their cheeks, no flush of fever or frost. Theirs was a pallor painted in shades of absinthe and sea glass, translucent enough that veins traced faint maps beneath, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to sync with the hidden hum of the roots below. Their eyes, wide and luminous as polished agates, held no terror, only a profound bewilderment, as if the world above ground were a dream half-remembered from another's slumber. Clad in tunics of coarse stuff, mottled like camouflage in twilight, perhaps a fabric woven from nettle or bark, alien to the wool and linen of East Anglia, they spoke in cadences that twisted the ear, a liquid trill, neither Anglo-Saxon grunt nor Norman lilt, but something older, echoing the wind through steppes untravelled by Saxon feet. The villagers, those hardy folk of plough and prayer, gathered like moths to this pale flame, offering bread and ale, but the children recoiled, their faces folding in refusal. Only when a sheaf of raw beans was pressed into the boy's palm did they partake, devouring the pods with a fervour that suggested sustenance long denied, their green jaws working in silent communion. The girl, the elder by a span of years, watched the reapers with a gaze that pierced like a needle through cloth, her silence a fortress until, days later, in the hearth warmth of the bailiff's hall, words tumbled forth in her unknowable tongue, translated, in time, by a priest versed in scraps of forgotten dialects. We come from the land of street, Martin, where all is green and no sun shines, a twilight realm entered through a cave that rang with bells like those of your church, but deeper, darker. Ah, but pause with me here, dear wanderer, along this glowing trail, as the second footprint fades into the grass, inviting you to lean closer to the riddle's heart. Street, Martin's land, not heaven's anteroom, as some pious scribes spun it, nor hell's verdant vestibule, but a hollow earth, a subterranean sanctum where light filtered through fissures in the crust, casting eternal gloam over fields of beans that grew without the kiss of day. The children spoke of a place where rivers ran with milk instead of water, where the air hung heavy with the scent of unseen flowers, and where their people pale as they, sustained by the earth's own bounty, knew no death by age, only by the slow withering of that pale sustenance. They had wandered, they said, chasing a stray ram into a cavern that hummed with harmonic resonance, its walls veined with crystals that sang when struck, only to emerge into this sun-scorched upper world, blinded and bewildered. The boy, frail as a reed in frost, pined for the familiar dusk and faded within moons, his green fading to the ashen pall of parting. The girl, Agneta they named her in baptism's grace, endured, her hue blushing to mortal pink with bread and sunlight, wedding a local lad and birthing children of common clay. Yet in her twilight years, by the fire's flicker, she would murmur of the cave's call, a portal pulsing with the planet's secret pulse. Follow the prince onward, where the path dips into a hollow scented with elderberry and regret, and feel the first shiver of the uncanny. This tale, etched by chroniclers like William of Newburgh in his Historia Rerum Anglicarum and Ralph of Coggeshall in his Chronicon, is no isolated fable, but a seed scattered across centuries, sprouting echoes in the 1600s Orphan winds. Imagine the bailiff's hall in Woolpit dissolving like mist at dawn, reforming as a candle-lit chamber in a Low Countries manse, 1627, where a Flemish herbalist tends to a pair of waifs washed up from the war's wreckage, their skin not fully green, but tinged with the jaundice of famine, their babble a mishmash of gutturals that twist the tongue toward Turkic turns. These were no direct descendants, yet their arrival mirrors the medieval murmur, children from the shadowed east, speaking in sibilants that scholars likened to the nomadic chants of Tatar horsemen, those steppe-dwellers whose empire sprawled like a shadow from the Volga to the Yangtze. The herbalist's journal, lost to a Prussian blaze but glimpsed in fragments by antiquarians, notes their tales of underground meadows lit by glowing stones, where elders harnessed the earth's inner fire crystals that captured lightning's whisper, powering lanterns without wick or oil, a subterranean splendor buried beneath the Tartarian plains. Here the path veers sharper, the footprints quickening as if fleeing revelation, drawing you into a thicket where thorns part like courtiers before a queen. What if these green wanderers were not mere medieval mirages, but emissaries from Tartaria's veiled vaults, the lost dominion that conspiracy's cartographers reclaim as a nexus of nomadic genius, its hordes not barbarians but bearers of boundless energy, taming tempests with towers that threaded the ether? The riddle deepens. The children's tongue, that elusive elixir of sound, bore uncanny kinship to the ancient Tartar dialects, harsh consonants rolling like thunder over vowels that dipped like hidden rivers, fragments preserved in the Codex of the Golden Horde, where scribes noted phonemes that echoed the Woolpit whispers 5 centuries prior. No coincidence, the shadowed savants argue. These were refugees from a reset's rupture, when the great mud deluge of the 1100s, perhaps a precursor pulse to the 1700s global gulp, cracked the crust. Yawning portals that swallowed surface strongholds and spat forth the young survivors into alien airs. The girl, Agneta's cave of bells, becomes a rift in reality, a wormhole wrought by the world's wound, where the reset's seismic sigh tore veils between realms, allowing the green ones sustained by subterranean sustenance, their bodies adapted to the glow of geothermal gardens, to tumble into our sunlit skein. Press on, as the third print pulses brighter, illuminating a glade where fireflies dance in defiance of the hour, and let the lore unfurl its forbidden fronds. Vatican vaults, those labyrinthine lungs of the church, harbour hints in their hushed holdings. Dispatches from Jesuit envoys in the 1600s, dispatched to the Silk Road's fringes, detailing wandering children from the eastern wastes, packs of pale urchins with eyes like polished jade, babbling in tongues that twisted Latin scholars into knots, dialects laced with Tartar twang, laced with pleas for the humming stones that lit their lost homes. These missives, redacted in the Index Librorum Prohibitorum's shadow, speak of hordes herded westward by the time of troubles in Muscovy, 1605, 1613, when famine and fevers felled the old and flung the young into the fray. Yet amid the refugee rivulets, anomalies, children who sketched spirals of energy, coils that captured the cave's captured fire, diagrams dismissed as devil's doodles but mirroring the mud flood relics unearthed in Siberian sinks. The Church, guardians of the gate, quashed these queries, attributing the influx to Tartar raids or Turkish traffickers. But the suppressed scripts suggest a subtler sabotage, portals pried open by the Reset's rage, rifts where Tartaria's underbelly, its geothermal grids, its crystal conduits channeling the planet's plasma pulse, belched forth its bewildered brood, their knowledge a threat to the candlelit creed of controlled creation. The path winds tighter now, the footprints forking like veins in marble, one trail veering toward the veil of veil-piercing theory. What if the Reset was no mere mudslide, but a multidimensional malfunction, a cosmic key turned askew that unlocked ley lines long locked? Envision the Woolpit wolf pit, not a simple snare for beasts, but a nexus of nodal energy, where Earth's electromagnetic meridians converged, humming in harmony until the 12th century cataclysm, a comet's caress or cause convulsion, jarred the junction, birthing a breach. The green children, adapted to street, Martin's Stygian splendor, slipped through this seam, their bodies bathed in bioluminescent broth that lent their limbs the land's own livery, their aversion to sunlight a safeguard against the upper world's ultraviolet scourge. In the 1600s echo, as the 30 Years' War whipped whirlwinds of woe, similar schisms scarred the steppes. Tartar tales from the Crimean Chronicles whisper of emerald exiles emerging from earth fissures during the 1630s plagues, bearing blueprints of buried beacons, devices that drew dower from the deep, illuminating igloos of ice without flame, a Tartarian trove toppled by the tide of time. Yet, as the fourth print dims to a hesitant haze, let us linger in the glade's glow and temper this tapestry of the tantalizing with the thread of the tangible, lest the riddle unravel into reverie unchecked. The British Folklore Society, in its meticulous monographs, frames the Woolpit Whisper as a weave of local legend, a moral mosaic spun from the Middle Ages' multicultural Malay Flemish weavers, fleeing the 1100s continental churn, their children starved and sallow from the siege of spinach-scarce slums, skin tinged by chlorosis, that insidious green sickness born of iron's ironclad absence. Hyperchromic anemia, as modern hematologists hymn, drains the blood's ruby rush, leaving limbs laced with the pallor of verdure, a pall that pinkens with proper provender, precisely as Agnetta's did, her bean-only beginnings a beggar's banquet of broad beans, rich in the absent element yet ritual-bound by refugee rite. The unknown utterance? No Tartar tapestry, but a toddler's tangle of tongues, Flemish fractured by fear, mingled with Anglo echoes, incomprehensible to unlettered ears, until familiarity's forge fashioned fluency. The underground utopia? A folkloric flourish, borrowed from Celtic cairn lore or Saxon sagas of hollow hills, where heroes harrowed the otherworld for harps of gold, portals as poetic as they were prosaic. No Vatican veil, no portals pry, merely the migration's melancholy, etched in emerald by malnutrition's muse. The 1600s Eastern wanderers mere Muscovite migrants, their humming stones hallucinations from hunger's haze. Still, the snare of the strange persists, doesn't it? Like a thorn caught in your sleeve as the path straightens once more. Why does Agnetta's alleged language linger in linguists' lexicons? Its phonemes, those guttural glides and sibilant sighs strumming strings akin to the Kipchak Turkic of 13th century Tartars, as noted in fringe philology's footnotes. Why do seismic surveys of Suffolk's subsoil reveal resonant rings, cavities that chime like bells when bored, as if the wolf pit were a weakened weld in the world's wiring? The Reset's riddle rebounds. If chlorosis cloaks the core, why the specificity of street? Martin's patron of the underground, his cloak cleft to clothe the chilled, mirroring the children's cave-cloaked exodus, and in the 1600s shadow, as orphans overflowed from eastern eddies, why the persistent prattle of glowing guardians, crystals that sang the sun's song from the soil, dismissed as delirium yet drawn in diaries that dodged the doctrinal dustbin. It is May of 1893, the air thick with the perfume of popcorn and ozone, the ground thrumming underfoot like the hide of some colossal beast roused from slumber. The world's Columbian Exposition unfolds before you, not as a map of marble halls, but as a fever dream of facades. 600 acres of neoclassical splendor rising from Jackson Park's reclaimed marsh. A white city of colonnades and cupolas that gleams under the assault of 25,000 incandescent bulbs, their glow banishing the night as if the sun had been bribed to linger. Drift first toward the Court of Honor, where the administration building looms like a borrowed temple from antiquity, its dome, a brazen echo of Rome's pantheon, though forged not in eternal travertine but in staff, a ephemeral elixir of plaster of Paris and jute fibers, moulded into majesty for a season's sake. A dandy in pinstripes pauses beside you, his mustache waxed to a point of incredulity, murmuring to his companion, "See how the lagoon mirrors it all, as if the gods themselves dipped brushes in moonlight." Yet lean closer, and his whisper fractures, "But mark the haste erected in 2 years flat, by hands that toiled through typhoid's grip and winter's bite. Temporary triumph, they call it. I call it a veil over voids." The lagoon laps lazily at the pilings, its surface a silvered screen reflecting the manufacture's building beyond a behemoth of glass and iron, vast as a cathedral for commerce, housing wonders from phonographs to pneumatic tubes. Here, amid the exhibits of Egyptian linens and Japanese silks, a cluster of matrons in bustled silks huddles around a diorama of model tenements, their fans fluttering like startled birds. One, her voice a lace-edged lilt, confides, "The board of lady managers insists it's progress creches for the working mother, kindergartens with Froebel's gifts to mould the mind." But listen to the whispers from the children's building yonder. They've gathered the waifs, the street Arabs, to parade their plights and promises. Ah, the children's building, that pastel pavilion of pedimented grace, a sanctuary scripted for the young, where 200,000 visitors will file through to witness the most improved methods of nurture under the 19th century's scrutinizing Sunday. You edge nearer, the crowd parting like mist before a prow, and overhear a governess in dove-grey bombazine schooling her charges. Observe the model nurseries, dears, with bassinets of wicker and wheels that rock by clockwork devices to soothe the fretful without a mother's weary arm. And there, the orphan alcove, tableau of tots in tidy pinafores, reciting primers on sanitation and savings. But beneath her prim patter, a ripple of revelation. During the fair's fever, nearly 2,000 children will vanish into the vortex, unclaimed wanderers reported missing amid the Midway's melee, their fates filed in the Chicago Historical Society's somber ledgers, some reunited by dint of detective drudgery, others melting into the ether like dew at dawn. A newsboy, cap askew and pockets bulging with hawked handbills, sidles up to a cluster of wide-eyed urchins, his patter a penny dreadful's pitch. "Extra! Extra!" Wee ones lost in the white city's whirl, swallowed by the Ferris wheel shadow or spirited to the sideshows. Hear the tale of the vanishing violinist, a lad no taller than your knee, who played a polka from the ether, and poof, gone with the gust. The Midway's murmur swells now, pulling you eastward along the Plaisance, a mile-long ribbon of revelry where the exposition's elegant veneer frays into exotic excess. A carnival of cultures curated for consumption. Stalls hawk Turkish taffy and Algerian attar, while a Dahomey village stages dances that draw gasps from the gallery. Yet it is the electricity that electrifies the evening, a current coursing through the veins of the venue like liquid lightning tamed. Veer toward the electricity building, that Corinthian colossus with its portals flanked by statues of Franklin and Faraday, and feel the hum before you hear it, a low threnody of transformers and dynamos, 25,000 horsepower, harnessed to hurl illumination across the acreage. Inside, the air crackles with controversy. Westinghouse's alternating current battles Edison's direct in a duel of demonstrations, arcs leaping like acrobats from Tesla's coils, bathing the hall in a blue-white blaze that paints faces in phantom phosphorescence. A cluster of engineers, sleeves rolled and spectacles steamed, debates in clipped cadences. See the polyphase wizardry power pulsed from Niagara's nascent falls, wireless in its whisper, no wires to web the world in want. Their rival, a mustachioed monopolist, scoffs. Toy tricks for the tinkerer, direct is destiny, steady as the Sunday. But hush word from the wires. The fair's own grid glitches at dusk, lights flickering as if fed by phantoms, drawing from depths the dynamos dare not delve. Eaves drop deeper as the throng thins toward the twilight exhibits, and a veiled figure, a woman in widow's weeds, her gloved hand clutching a locket etched with etheric sigils, bends to a bespectacled savant. They say the current courses not just through copper, but from the captured cataclysms below the mud's own memory, resonators ripped from ruins and rewired for the revel. Tesla himself paces the perimeter, muttering of etheric antennas, towers that tap the twilight zone where energy ebbs eternal. The savant nods, his voice a velvet rumble. Indeed, the fair flaunts what the floods forgot. Free power from the firmament, pilfered from the palaces now pulped to plaster. But mark the midways missing those green-tinged tots from the east, herded here not for harmony, but hypnosis. The children's building cloaks it. Sessions in the shadow rooms, where mesmeric mirrors and mild magnets murmur forgetfulness, erasing echoes of the emerald earth, reprogramming the prodigies for plough and parlour. The conspiracy coils tighter in these clandestine colloquies, a serpent slithering through the spectacle's seams. What if the exposition was no mere monument to modernity, but a meticulously masked migration, a grand geyser for the gathering of the Green's grandchildren, those 1,600 strays whose subterranean secrets simmered in their synapses? The theory, traded in tobacco-scented taverns beyond the gates, posits the fairs as funnels, orphans funneled from the train's terminal trails, funneled into the fair's folds under the guise of educational exhibits. In the children's building's veiled vestibules, away from the prattling public, orientation ateliers awaited chambers carpeted in crimson velvet, lit by the soft strobe of nascent neon, where attendants in academic attire administered therapeutic trances. Hypnotic harmonics, hummed from hidden horns or hummed through headsets of hammered brass, wove webs of suggestion. Your twilight tales are tempests of the mind. The White City is your waking world, its wires your worth. The children, softened by the spectacle's sensory siege, Ferris wheel's vertiginous vista, the rumble of the rumble seat succumbed. Their recollections of Tartaria's twilight tech crystals that crooned current from the core, spires that siphoned starlight recast as reveries to be relinquished. Repurposed, they radiated outward, radiating to rural realms as ready recruits, their latent lore locked in latency, lest it loose the leviathan of limitless light upon the lords of limited lines. Press on through the percolating crowd, where a phalanx of philanthropists, bearded benefactors, with briefcases brimmed with blueprints, pause over a pavilion of pneumatic wonders, tubes that whisk messages like magic, elevators that ascend without apparent effort. One, his lapel pinned with a Progressive Party's pledge, leans to his lieutenant. The fair funds the future millions poured into plaster palaces, yet the profits in the people, those pint-sized pioneers from the poorhouses, primed here for placement. The board whispers of waivers, waiving wages for the waifs who wander the wards, their wonder-wide eyes witnesses to the wizardry we wield. His lieutenant, a ledger-lean lawyer, counters with a conspiratorial curl. Aye, but the erasure's the essence post. Fair fires to fell the facades, torching the traces of the taken tech. January 94. The inferno ignites, devouring the dynamo halls in a blaze that belches blueprints into the bay. Accidental? Or arson to ash the etheric archives, ensuring Edison's empire endures, unencumbered by the underground's unbound bounty? The flames flicker in foresight now, a prescient pyre previewed in the pavilion's play of shadows, where a troupe of tots, tiny thespians in starched smocks, enacts a tableau of tomorrow's toilers, miming the motions of mill and mine under the gaze of gilded guardians. You sidle closer, catching the chorus of a copper-haired cherub, her cue-card cadence cracking. We learn the light that lasts, from lamps that leap no more steady streams for sturdy souls, no storms to steal the store. But in the wings, a whisper from a wide-eyed ward to her whisper mate. They make us forget the fire below, the bells that rang in the dark, the green glow that grew our games. Here, the lights lie, pulling power from the sky we never see. The ward's words waver like willow, the wisps winking out as a chaperone chides, but they linger, a lit fuse in the listener's labyrinth. Wander westward now, toward the Woman's Building, that bastion of the bonneted, where Bertha Palmer's brigade showcases suffrage scrolls and sewing machines, yet even here, the Orphan undercurrent undercuts the uplift. A seamstress circle, needles flashing like fireflies, stitches stories into samplers. The fair feeds the foundlings, frocks for the forsaken, but the fine prints in the fostering families cherry-picked from the crowd, claiming cubs for the cause. One, her thimble thumb tracing a tartan thread, confides in a conspirator's cadence. And the hypnosis? Hidden in the harmony halls, where harpsichords hum with hidden frequencies, tuned to Tesla's torments. The children chant choruses of compliance, their chants chasing the chimeras of caves and crystals from their craniums. Post-pageant, the placements proliferate, prairie parents procuring prodigies, blind to the buried brilliance they bear. As the calliope creaks to a close, the crowd coalesces around the Ferris wheel, that colossus of cantilevered conceit, 1,000 feet in circumference, its cars cradling 2,000 thrill-seekers at a time, ascending to afford a vista of the vanishing. The white city's whites washed in the waning sun, the lake's lapis lapping at the landfill's edge. A quartet of questers, quill-pushing journalists with notepads at the ready cues for the climb, their chatter a cascade of conjecture. The wheel whirls the world into wonder, but what's wound in its works? Gears greased with the ghosts of the gone, orphans orbiting the oblivion. One, a freckled freelancer from the Fairgoers Gazette, flourishes a flask, heard from a handler in the Hall of Humanity. The cars conceal compartments, cradles for the covert children catalogued and conveyed, their cries camouflaged by the creek. Hypnotized en route, emerging in the Dakotas as docile drudges, their dreams of deep earth dynamos dissolved in the dust. His cohort, a cynical scribe with a cigar clenched like a curse, counters, fairy tales for the features page. The fair's a forge for the future, fusing families fractured by the frontier. But the burn? That's the Barb 94's blaze, birthing the black scar on the sward, torching the temporary to tally the triumph in tickets sold. Yet, as the car clicks into ascent, the exposition's enigma elevates. What veiled virtues did these vanishing visions vouchsafe? The theory tempts with its tensile twist. The fair's as fulcrums of forgetfulness, where the green's genetic ghosts, those woolpit wanderers' wayward kin, were winnowed and woven into the warp of the West, their Tartarian trove transmuted to toil. The electricity? Not nascent novelty, but nostalgic nod to the buried beams. Tesla's towers a tardy tribute to the twilight tech toppled by tides of time. The demolition? Deliberate decimation, dynamiting the dynamos to dam the deluge of discovery, lest the light from the ley lines loose the locks on limitless legacy. Temper this tapestry now, tender traveller through the throng, with the tonic of the tangible, the exposition as engine of enlightenment, a colossal convocation catalyzing the century's surge. The Children's Building? A beacon of benevolence, beaming best practices from Berlin kindergartens to Boston nurseries. Its exhibits dollhouses of domesticity, puzzles of pedagogy, prescribing progress for the progeny of the poor. The missing mites? Mere mishaps of the multitude, magnified by the Midway's maze, reclaimed by the relentless round of reunions. No nefarious nabbery in the narrative. Electricity's éclat, a earnest emulation of Edison's empire building, alternating currents auditioned in the arena of innovation, birthing the bulb-lit boulevards of the Belle Époque without a whisper of the weird. The structure's swift surrender to the pyre, pragmatic purgation, plaster palaces ponderous to preserve, their demolition a dividend of the dollar salvaging steel for skyscrapers, salvaging space for the city's ceaseless sprawl. The 1894 conflagration, a caprice of careless coals, not a cabal's calculated cull. Still, the subtle snags snag the skepticism. Why the selective salvage, the sole survivor, the snub-nosed Stockholm Synod House, spirited across the sea while the dynamo dens dissolved? Why the whispers from the wards, the waif's wary words of lights that lie, echoing the green one's gloam? The fair's facade fractures just enough to foster the fancy, a fissure where fact flirts with fable. inviting your intellect to idle in the interstice. As the Ferris wheel's final creak fades into the hush of the lakeside night, its silhouette a skeletal sentinel against the indigo sky, let us not descend with the dazzled crowds, but ascend instead, rising like smoke from a censer's bowl, coiling upward through the rafters of revelation to perch upon the unseen eaves where the true architects convene. Here, in the shadowed scriptorium of supposition, we eavesdrop not on the midway's merriment, but on the murmurs of the masked, a clandestine convocation, imagined yet insistent, where the exposition's electric hum serves as cover for confessions, etched in ciphered ledgers and laced with the ink of intrigue. Picture a ledger bound in Moroccan Morocco, its pages perfumed with pipe tobacco and portent, falling open in the gaslit gloom of a Paris garret, though the year is 1900 now, the universal exposition unfurling along the Seine like a serpent of steel and stucco. We borrow its blueprint from Chicago's Ghost to bridge the boulevards of conspiracy. This is no solitary stroll through spectacle. It is a mosaic of missives, intercepted and illuminated, each fragment a facet of the fair's forbidden face, revealing how the elite, those Freemasonic fraternity brothers with their aprons of azure and compasses of concealed intent, wove the world's fairs into a web of willful occlusion. The first fragment flutters free like a moth from a sealed envelope, postmarked from the Élysée Palace's periphery, dated July 14th, 1900. Bastille Day's irony, not lost on its author, a certain Comte de Lumière, whose nom de plume masks a lineage tracing to the Illuminati's flickering flame. My dear brethren of the Lodge Invisible, it commences in a script as serpentine as the Seine itself, as the Eiffel Tower, our iron idol, erected for the 89 Jubilee, and now dwarfed by the Grand Palais's gaudy grandeur, pierces the Parisian pall. So too does our grand design pierce the veil of the vulgar. The Exposition Universelle is no mere mart of marvels, no bazaar for the bourgeois to barter their banalities. It is the crucible of control, where the seeds of the New World Order are sown in the soil of spectacle. Observe the ethnographic enclaves, villages contrived from colonial clay, where Dahomean dancers and Senegalese smiths perform their primitive pageants under the gaze of gilded guardians. But turn your eye to the heart, the Hall of Machines, where Krupp's cannons cavort alongside Siemens dynamos, a symphony of subjugation disguised as symphony of science. And the children? Ah, the innocents imported as cultural curiosities 5,000 strong, herded from the harbours of Hanoi, and the hovels of Hanoi-adjacent haunts, their dark eyes wide with the wonder we weaponize. De Lumiere's pauses in his prose, the quill hovering like a hawk over prey, before delving deeper. They arrive in cohorts, these cultural chattel, clad in the cast-offs of their conquered climes, silks from Siam, feathers from the feathered serpent's fall. Paraded in the colonial pavilion, they enact authentic rituals, a Balinese boy balancing atop a bamboo pole, a troop of Tuareg tots tracing tribal tattoos in temporary henna. To the ticketed throng, it is edutainment, a digest of the dominions. To us, it is indoctrination inverted, the masses mesmerized by the marginal, learning to lord over the lesser while we lord over the lesson. Freemasonic fingers, mine among them, fiddle the funds, funneling Fairgate fees to fraternal foundations that forge the future's fetters. The New World Order germinates here, not in edicts from empires, but in the subconscious script, superiority scripted in spectacle, where the exotic exhibit erodes empathy, paving the path for our planetary parliament. The ledger's leaf turns with a sigh, revealing a rider in rosier hue, a ribboned reply from a Bostonian brother, one Elias Hawthorne, whose transatlantic missive arrives via the Cunard liner's covert courier, scented with the salt of suppressed seas. Esteemed Comte, Hawthorne's hand hurries. Your Parisian pageant parallels our Colombian charade of '93, where the Midway Plaisance played the same pernicious pantomime. Recall the Algerian village, a facsimile of Algiers, peopled by 50 souls shipped from Oran, their days a diorama of daily drudgery, under the unblinking eye of the ethnographer's lens. Children chief among them, wee Berber waifs weaving willow baskets, their chants a counterpoint to the Calliope's cacophony. To the fairgoer, folklore funneled through a fishbowl. To the initiated, a primer in partition. We of the Scottish Rite, with our symbolic spires and secret sigils, subsidized the staging dollars discreetly donated to the Department of Ethnology, ensuring the exhibits echoed our esoteric edicts. Divide to dominion. The many made meek by the mirror of the other. Hawthorne's heat heightens, but the peril persists in the progeny these pint-sized performers, their psyches pliable as potter's clay. Whispers from the wardens of the West Wing, warn of wayward words. A Laplander lass, loaned from Lapland's lean latitudes, lisping of lightning lodges buried beneath the tundra, where shamans summoned storms from stone circles that sang like sirens. Her tale, told in the twilight tent to a cluster of curious cubs, threatens to unravel the reset's ragged seam, the Tartarian tapestry we tore to tatters in the tempests of yore. Hence the hidden hand. Mesmeric mentors, masked as missionaries, mingle with the miners, murmuring mantras of mundanity. Your lore is legend, lass. The fair's fire is fact. They coo, their cadence calibrated to the crystal's chime, inducing amnesia akin to the etheric arts of old. By fair's finale, the flock is funneled forward to foster farms in the French countryside, or freighted to forgotten frontiers, their forbidden fancies forgotten, fertile fields for our New World nursery. Interpose now an interlude from the Inkwell's inverse, a forged forgery, purportedly pilfered from the Pope's private post, a papal proxy protesting the Parisian ploy. Penned in purple prose by a prelate of the Propaganda Fide, it protests, "Brethren in the shadows, your exposition is an exegesis of excess, a Babel rebuilt in Bow, art's blasphemy." The Vatican views with veiled vexation the village noir, a faux African enclave where Congolese children, conscripted from the Congo's cruel colonies, cavort in contrived ceremonies, their innocence inverted into imperial icon. 500 strong, say the spies in the sacristy, shipped in steerage from Stanley's scourged shores. Their exhibits a Eucharist of exploitation, baptisms by boulevard, where baptismal fonts flow with fairground fizz. Yet the undercurrent unnerves. These ebony cherubs, echoing the emerald exiles of English legend, evoke an elder empire, the Tartaria we theologians tentatively term the twilight theocracy, a theosophic threat shrouded in the steppe silence. Their songs, sung in Swahili laced with lost lexicons, summon spectres of subterranean spires, energy etched in earth that eludes our electric era. The prelate's plea pivots to peril. The Freemasons' fingerprints foul the fair funds funneled through French lodges to fabricate the facades, ensuring the ethnographic exhibits eclipse the eternal. But beware the backlash. The children, unwitting vessels of veiled verities, voice visions of vortex vaults where victors of vanquished ages vanished, their vaults vibrating with the void's own voltage. To silence such sirens, your order orchestrates the occult overlay, cultural congresses in cordoned cloisters, where card-sharps of the Cabal conduct collective catharsis chants calibrated to the Cabal's cadence, crystals concealed in candelabras to cleanse the cognition. The New World Order you nurture? A Novus Ordo Seclorum scrawled in the stars of your seal, but seeded here in the psyches of the small, their Tartarian traces transmuted to toys and tantrums. These missives merge now in a murmur of montage, the ledger's leaves lapsing into a litany of the lurid. A third epistle, etched by an English expatriate in the exposition's employ, exposes the exhibit's esoteric edge. From the fringes of the Fine Arts Pavilion, quoth Quentin Quill, where Whistler's whims whisper against the walls of the world's women painters, I witnessed the weave. The International Infant Exhibit, a nursery of nations, with bassinets borrowed from Bavaria, and bonnets from Bohemia harbours not harmony but hegemony. 3,000 tots, tallied in the tally sheets I tamper with, transported from the train's tangled termini, Turks from Thessaloniki, Jews from Jerusalem's jails, all arrayed as archetypes of advancement. To the tourist, a touching tableau. To the Templars of the Temple, a template for taming. The elite your Rosicrucian kin, compte convene in the catacombs beneath the Champ de Mars, their conclaves cloaked in the clatter of construction cranes. charting the course of the coming century, knowledge as commodity, controlled by the compass of the craft. Quill's quill quivers, the dancing plague of 1518, not mere madness in medieval Strasbourg, but a prototype, a plague of persuasion penned in our playbook Ergo's ecstasy, engineered to enthrall the masses, a mass mania to mask the mud's murmur. 1,500 souls seized by Street Vitus's vice, gyrating through the guilds and graveyards, their frenzy a foretaste of fairground fervour. We revisit it here, subtly. Spiked sherbets in the shadow shows, fungi furtively fed to the frolicking young, inducing itches of imitation children chasing chimeras in choreographed chaos, their steps sinking to the suggestion of submission. Ergotamine echoes, amplified by the etheric aura of the arc lights, ensure the exhibit's energy erodes the ego, priming the progeny for the new order's nod. Post-Pageant purge, pyres planned in the pavilion's plans January's blaze to bury the blueprints, torching the traces of Tartaria's tantalizing tech, lest the lights from the ley lines leapfrog our luminous lies. The fragments fuse in a fevered finale, the ledger lurching shut as if scorched by its own secrets, leaving us to ponder the pyre's prophecy. Paris 1900's inferno, a year hence, devours the dreamscape in a dawn devourment, flames felling the facades while the faithful flee with filched files. Was it wind-whipped whimsy, or willful wipe, a ritual reduction to rubble, redacting the reset's ragged remnants? Yet, as this mosaic of missives melts into the mind's mist, let the light of learning lance the law's labyrinth, lest the letters lead us lost. The Universal Exposition of 1900, in the annals of the Annales School and the archives of the Archives Nationales, stands as a summit of showmanship, a global gabfest, galvanizing globalization's gears. The ethnographic exhibits, earnest endeavors in anthropology's adolescence, curated by cosmographers like those of the Société d'Anthropologie de Paris, to catalogue cultures without conquest's cudgel villages voluntary, performers paid, if paltrily, a mirror of the metropole's multicultural mosaic, not a manifesto of malice. The children, cherished chapters in the Charter of Charity, their cultural congresses, confluences of compassion, creches convened by the Congrès International des Femmes, fostering cross-cultural kinship, no knots of knavery in the narrative. Freemasons, fraternal footnotes at best, their lodges lighting local lamps, but not the exposition's levers funds flowed from fairgoers' fees, not fraternal francs. The New World Order, a notion nascent in Nesbit's novels, not exposition edicts. The dancing plague, demystified by modern mycology, ergot of rye, claviceps purpurea, its alkaloids alchemized into convulsions and visions, a fungal fiasco fueled by famine's foul fare, not a cabal's calculated caper. Historians like those of the Strasbourg Historical Society harmonize it as hysteria's harvest. No hypnotic harbinger. The post-fair pyre, prudent pruning, plaster ponderous and pest-prone, raised by routine rather than right, salvaging steel for the city's ceaseless climb, no nefarious nod in the ashes. Still, the snags in the skein summon scrutiny. Why the selective survival? The soul's spire spared the sane's salvage. Why the ward's wary whispers of vortex vaults, veiled in the vaudeville's veil? The mosaic mocks the mundane, a medley where missive meets mystery, urging your unconscious to unravel the unspooled. Pause with me a moment and share below. From which hidden nook are you letting these secrets seep in? And what's the hour on your wall as the shadows lengthen? 1897, where rain lashes the eaves like impatient fingers tapping code against a locked door. The room is a reliquary of reluctance. Blueprints curled at the edges like dying leaves, coils of copper wire coiled in nests of neglect, and in the corner, a hulking apparatus of oak and obsidian, a tower in miniature, its apex crowned with a crystal that catches the lamplight and refracts it into rainbows that dance like defiant sprites. This is the sanctum of Elias Thornwood, a tinkerer whose name eludes the annals, a spectral savant who bridged the bayous of bay mud to the boulevards of buried brilliance, his fingers stained not with ink but with the residue of resonance. Thornwood hunches over his workbench, his spectacles perched on a nose hooked like a question mark, murmuring to the machine as if it were a confidant grown coy. "Ah, my silent sentinel," he breathes, his voice a rasp honed by years of solitary soldering. "You remember the whispers from the west, don't you? The way the ground groaned in '89, when Seattle swallowed its own streets in that 6-foot slurry from the lake's lazy lunge." He traces a finger along the tower's base, where etchings faint, filigreed spirals gleam like veins of vanquished veinstone. The Great Seattle Fire of the 7th of June, 1889. Not a spark from a careless cabinet-maker's glue pot, as the ledgers of loss insist, but a conflagration conceived in the crucible of concealment, they say in the smoke-scented salons of the suppressed. 25 blocks of clapboard chaos. $6 million in flames that leaped like liberated lightning, reducing the sawdust city to a pyre that purged the past. Thornwood's eyes narrow, the lamplight lending his gaze the glint of a gear mid-turn. They built it back in 90 days, didn't they? Brick and mortar marching from the mud, streets raised 10 feet overnight, as if the earth itself conspired to cover the cracks. Immigrants pouring in Chinese carpenters with calluses like corduroy, Norwegian masons hauling granite from godforsaken fjords, hands that hammered the hasty horizon into habitations of haste. Progress, they proclaimed, a phoenix from the fen. But you and I, my coil-kissed companion, we know the hush beneath the hammer. The haste hid the hollows, the basements brimming with the bones of the buried, relics rusting from a realm reset. The tower trembles faintly under his touch, as if awakening to his words, its crystal pulsing with a light that isn't quite reflection, a subtle surge, like the breath of a bellows stoking an unseen forge. Thornwood leans closer, his whisper weaving through the workshop's web of wires. It started with the salvage, after the slurry settled, diggers dredging the debris from Lake Washington's laps, that deluge that liquefied the lots, turning timber to taffy, struck not just struts and shingles but strangeness, urns of unclassifiable ore, lightweight as whispers yet humming under the hammer, alloys that defied the dross of the day, and the diagrams, etched on shards of slate that surfaced like secrets from a sibyl's sleeve, helices of harmonic harvest, loops that lured the lightning from the latent lattice of the air. Ether, they called it in the old tongues, the fifth essence, the quintessence that Tartaria tamed, threading towers that tapped the twilight zone where energy ebbs eternal, unbound by the bottlenecks of barronage. Seattle's sink, that '89 seep, wasn't mere meteorological misdemeanor. It was a mud midwife, birthing the buried blueprints from the belly of the beast, exhaling the etheric engines that once empowered the palaces, now pulped to prairie dust. He straightens, pacing the perimeter of his parlor laboratory, his boot heels clicking against floorboards that creak like confessions. The rain outside redoubles, a rhythmic requiem that syncs with the tower's subtle thrum, as if the storm itself were straining to listen. Tesla knew, of course, that Croatian conjurer with his coils of cosmic courtship, pacing the fringes of the fairgrounds in '93, his eyes alight with the ark's azure allure. He claimed the current from the coils, the polyphase pulse that powered the exposition's electric embrace. But whence the whisper? Not from Niagara's nascent falls alone, but from the notebooks he nicked from the Niagara of the North, the mud-choked vaults of Vancouver Island, where Jesuit journals jotted of Jesuit towers unearthed in the 1870s, spires of stone and stannery that stood sentinel over the Salish Sea, channeling the charge from the clouds without a single strand of wire. Tesla toured the tangles in '88. They murmur in the musty margins of his marginalia, sketching the skeletons of those sentinels in the silence of his steamer cabin, their geometries, a geometry of genius, parabolic prisms that prismed the plasma of the planet's pole, resonators that resonated with the radio waves of the Roaring Twenties, decades before Marconi's mendacious monopoly. Thornwood halts before a corkboard crucified with clippings yellowed yields from the Yukon Gold Rush, snippets from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, decrying the anomalous artifacts auctioned in the aftermath of the '89 blaze. One, a grainy grain of a photo, shows a salvaged spire, a slender shaft of schist, veined with verdigris, its apex adorned with an orb that orbed the oracle's eye, humming faintly in the hands of the handler. "See here," he husks, tapping the tower's twin in miniature. The elite embargoed it all. Rockefellers and Rothschilds, their syndicates of scarcity scripting the script of steam and stock. Ether was the antagonist, the unbound bounty that beggared the barons, free for the fetching, drawn from the dipole dance of the dynamo at the core, or the ionosphere's infinite inkwell. Tartaria's tenet was transmission without toll. Cities like Seattle's spectral precursor sprawled across the sound in the 1600s, their grids glowing with gaseous globes that needed no filament, their street lamps lit by the latent luminosity of ley lines laced through the land. But the reset's rage, that recurrent ripple, the younger Dryas's younger sibling in the 1700s, rinsed it in rivers of relic mud, leaving only the orphans to oracle the old ways, their cradle songs coded with the cadence of coils. The crystal flares then, a fleeting flourish that floods the room with fractals of frost-blue fire, illuminating the inventor's face in facets of fervor and fatigue. He chuckles, a dry, deciduous rustle. And Tesla? He toyed with the taboo, building his Wardenclyffe wonder in 1901, a tower to trumpet the tidings of transatlantic talk without the tyranny of transoceanic cables, funded by the faithful J.P. Morgan at first, who fancied the fortune in the frequency's wireless wealth wired to his wallet. But when Nicola unveiled the unvarnished truth that ether annihilated the need for nickel and naphtha, that one Wardenclyffe could web the world in waves of greatest glow, the moneymen recoiled. Morgan yanked the yarn in 1903, deeming it too utopian. But the undercurrent was cruder. Control the current, or the commons claim it. The tower toppled in 1917, dynamited to dust for World War scrap. Its secrets scattered like shrapnel into the soil of Shoreham, where spectral surveys still sense the subterranean surge, a ghost grid groaning under Long Island's lawns. Thornwood's tail tapers, his hand hovering over a hidden hatch in the tower's torso, where a latch loosens with a lover's sigh, revealing a vial of viscous violet, the etheric elixir, he calls it, distilled from the dregs of a dig in the Duwamish Delta, where dredgers in the 1890s disinterred a dynamo dormant, its drum humming with the residue of resonance. Pour it in, and she sings, he confides, tipping the tincture into the tower's throat, where it trickles like tears into a tin man's heart. The machine murmurs to life, not with clamour but with a caress of cadence, a low libretto of light that ladders up the lattice, cresting in the crystal's crown, where it blooms into a beacon that bends the beams of the bedside bulb, casting shadows that shimmy like secrets set free. This is the thread from Tartaria's torn tapestry, Thornwood intones, his voice vibrating in sympathy, the energy that eluded the elite, banned not by ballot but by the brute arithmetic of avarice. Oil's octopus empire, standard suckers in every soil, squeezed the ether from the lexicon, labelling it lunatic fringe, while licensing the lamps that lined their ledgers. Seattle's swift rebuild, a smokescreen for the salvage, crews combing the cinders for the crystal caches, carting them to Carnegie coffers, where they were crushed into commonplace conduits, their hum hushed in the hush of history. Yet, as the light ladders higher, limning the inventor's lined face with lines of luminous longing, a counterpoint creeps in a cadence of caution, the workshop's walls whispering back with the weight of the world as it was wrought. Thornwood tilts his head, as if hearing a harmony from the hearth. But balance the beam, my ether, eared auditor. The saga's not solely shadow. Seattle's surge from the sludge was the sinew of the sinewy Republic immigrants as the inexhaustible ink, their influx from the Isles and the Old World, a tide that turned timber towns to trade titans. 20,000 souls swelling the streets by 1890, hands from Hamburg and Hong Kong, hammering the hasty harbours into hubs of halibut and hemlock, their labour, the literal lift that layered the lots 10 feet high, not to hide but to harness the harbour's hungry hug. No nefarious nod in the narrative, merely the muscle of migration, the grit of the Gilded Age grinding geology into geometry, progress propelled by the ploughshare of the possible. He nods to the newsprint nailed nearby, its headlines heralding the harnessed. The fire? Faulty forge work, a glue pot's glow gone greedy, fanned by the foam winds off the Cascades, 25 blocks in 30 minutes. Yes, but reborn in resilience. The rebuild a blueprint for Buffalo and Baltimore. Cities scorched and scaffolded in the same swift span. And Tesla's tumble? Not Taboo's triumph, but the tally of the tangible. Morgan's millions melted in the maw of mismanagement. Nikola's notions noble but needy Wardenclyffe's wireless wonder wanted for want of watts. The infrastructure immature. The investors irked by the intangible returns. By 1910, the tower was a tarnished totem, scrapped for the sinews of the Great War, not silenced by syndicate spite, but sidelined by the stubborn scaffold of supply chains, where copper's cost clipped the cosmic clipper's wings. The tower's thrum tempers now, tapering to a tender tremor, the violet vial's vestiges vanishing into vapor that veils the room in a violet veil. Thornwood slumps onto a stool, his sigh a symphony's subsidence. So the ether eludes us still, a phantom frequency flickering at the fringe band, perhaps by the Baron's bargain, or merely marooned by the march of the measurable. Seattle stands as sentinel, its streets a strata of secrets, built on the backs of the buried and the bold. Fires forging not just facades but the forge of the future. Did Tesla truly pilfer from the past's pulped palaces, or polish the possible into the profound? The ambiguity aches like an untuned string, plucked in the quiet of this cluttered cloister, as the violet vapor veils the workshop's waning light, thinning like morning mist over a forgotten fjord. Allow yourself to dissolve with it, not into wakefulness, but into the fluid folds of a dream, where boundaries blur, and the breath of the deep becomes your own. You are the current itself, a silken stream slipping through the strata of sediment and story, carried backward on the curl of a cosmic wave that crests not in foam, but in the faint fluorescence of forgotten firmaments. Feel the pull, gentle as a tide teasing the toes, drawing you through a fissure in the firmament, a rent in reality's robe, where the ether's echo meets the earth's eternal exhale. This is the legacy of the reset, not a linear ledger of loss, but a luminous loop, a helix of havens risen and raised, where Atlantis unfurls as the azure ancestor of Tartaria's twilight throne, their threads tangled in the tapestry of time's tidal turns. Breathe with the swell, in and out, as the dream delivers you to the rim of a ringed realm, its waters whispering welcomes in a tongue older than the olive groves of Athens. The vision stabilizes now, sharpening like a lens adjusted in the hush of a hermit's cell, revealing not the workshop's wire-wound wonders, but a horizon haloed in haze, an island archipelago afloat in the wine-dark wine of the western sea, its silhouette a symphony of symmetries, concentric circlets of canal and continent, land locked in liquid embrace, each annulus, a avenue of aqueducts that arched like lovers' arms under the arch of an eternal equinox Sunday. This is Atlantis, not as the fabulists flourish, but as the philosopher's phantom, conjured in the dialogues of Plato, those Socratic symposia scripted in the shadow of the Sicilian sun, where Timaeus and Critias converse, as if unspooling a yarn from the god's own loom. Hear Critias's cadence, clear as a lyre's lingering note, an empire elder than Egypt's elder pharaohs, 9,000 years before Solon's sojourn in Sais, a polity of Poseidon's progeny where bulls were browbeaten in bull rings ringed by ruby-red ramparts, where orichalcum, that mythical metal, gleaming like fire-forged fire, veined the walls with veins of vermilion victory. The central citadel pulses at the heart, a hub of hot springs harnessed for healing, its harbours hewn to hug the hulls of hull-less ships, fleets that furrowed the foam without fear of flaw. Temples towered there, gilded and grand, their gables groaning under the weight of gold-leaf gods, while the plain beyond bloomed with bounties ordained by divine decree, canals crisscrossing like the creases in a soothsayer's palm, irrigating orchards of ambrosial abundance. But linger longer in this luminous limbo, where the dream's drift deposits you on a quay of quarried quartz, the air alive with the aroma of ambergris and attar, and ponder the pivot. What if this was no mere moralizing myth, Plato's parable of pride's precipitous plunge, but a palimpsest of the palpable, a veiled vignette of a vanished vanguard, the primordial precursor to Tartaria's terrestrial triumph? The connection coils like a conch shell's spiral, its chambers chambered with the chamber music of cataclysms, resets recurring as the refrain of a rogue rhythm, mud floods as the mundane mask for the maelstroms that marooned the mighty. Imagine the interval between Atlantis's azure apogee and Tartaria's terrestrial tenure, not a chasm of chronology, but a chain of continuums, where the island's initiates, those initiate engineers who etched energy from the elements, channeling the chthonic charge through chrysoprase conduits, fled the final fracture, fragmenting across the flood's frothy frontier to seed the steppes with their sylvan science. Plato's precipice, that single day and night of misfortune when earthquakes and effluvia engulfed the empire in a gulp of God-wrought wrath, becomes the blueprint for the mud's methodical maw, a deluge, not of divine disdain alone, but of dimensional discord, a warp in the world's weave that warped the waters into weapons, liquefying the lithosphere to lap at the last bastions of the bold. The dream deepens now, the key quivering, as if the quartz beneath your feet were quickening to quartz's quiet quake, and you are pulled under, not drowned, but delivered through a descending helix, a spiral staircase of seawater that shimmers with schools of silver-scaled sentinels, their eyes like lanterns lighting the labyrinthine descent. Emerge in an undercroft of undulating umber, a cavernous continuum where Atlantean artifacts await like awakening ancestors, a tablet of talc-veined turquoise, its glyphs glowing with the grammar of geomancy symbols that summon the sun's subterranean sister, diagrams depicting domes that drew dower from the deep, resonators ringed in rings of radiant runestone. These were the tools of the twilight transition, the tech that traversed the tempests. Atmospheric antennas attuned to the aurora's azure aria, engines that extracted ether from the equatorial embrace, powering palaces that pierced the pall without the pyre's profane pollution. The elite of antiquity, those Poseidon-pedigreed potentates, their blood blue as the brine knew the knot of the nexus, energy as emanation, not extraction, a gift from the globe's glowing girdle, the geomagnetic girdle that girded the Garden of Gods. But the reset's ripple returns, relentless as the return of a rogue wave, and the cavern cracks with a clarion call, a chorus of crystalline chime that chimes the change. You surface now in a steppe swept by Simum's sigh, the air arid and alive with the after-aroma of attar and ash, where the tents of Tartaria's transient titans billow like the breaths of bellows long-blown cold. This is the bridge in the dream's bold bend, the legacy linking the lost isle to the landlocked Leviathan. Atlantis's alchemical adepts, adrift on arcs of arc wood and ingenuity, alighting on the Altai's anvil-forged flanks, intermarrying with the indigenous infinities, the Scythian shamans with their scimitars of star iron, the Silk Road sylphs with their scrolls of silken sorcery. From this fusion flowered the fields of free flux, Tartarian towers, tall as the talismans of the deep, topped with topaz orbs that orbited the oracle's orbit, harvesting the harmonic hum from the horizon's hidden harp strings. The mud flood, that millennial malady, manifests as the mimic, not a novel nemesis, but the nephew of Atlantis's nemesis, a cyclic curse calibrated to the comet's caprice or the core's capricious churn, burying the bold in blankets of basaltic brew, only for the survivors to sow the seeds anew. Feel the dream's draft shift now, a zephyr zipping through the zenith, zooming you to a zenith of zest, a ziggurat of zeocon and zephyrstone on the Zambezi's zygomorphic zephyrs, though no pivot to the Peries portent, the map that mocks the mundane, a parchment pinnacle penned in the portentous penumbra of 1513, where Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis pirate turned polymath plotted the planet with a precision that pricks the pride of posterity. Unfurl it in your mind's meniscus, this fragment of a frayed fantasia, coastlines caressed with the cartouche's caress, the Americas articulated with an accuracy that antedates Amerigo's eponymous echo, South America's southern shore sketched with a surety that shames the sextants of the 17th century. But the anomaly aches like an unsolved anagram, Antarctica's Antarctic appendage, appended in ice-free ink, its mountains mantled, not in millennial mantle but in the nude geometry of a globe unglaciated, as if surveyed in the sunlit summers of a southern spring 12 millennia past. Piri's provenance? purloined from a portfolio of pilfered portolans Columbus's cribbed charts, cribbed from the ciphers of the Crusader cartographers, who cribbed from the coffers of Constantine's conquered Constantinople. Yet the whisper winds through the warp. This was the window to the world's withheld wisdom, a Xerox of Xerxes' Xenial xenography, tracing the tendrils of Tartaria's transcontinental tracery back to Atlantis's azure atlas maps, memorized by the mud's mute initiates, passed in pantomime through the pantheon of the peripatetic, from the Pharos of Pharos to the frontisterion of Plato's progenitors. The dream dilates here, the helix honing to a horizon where the haze hazes into heraldry, heraldic hints of the hidden hand, the elite's eternal embargo on the emanation. Envision the envoys of empire, those Iberian inquisitors with their indices of infamy, their indices indexing the indigenous infinities stumbling upon the scrolls in the sacked seraglios of Seville, scrolls that scrolled the saga of the sunken and the step-spanning. Atlantis as the Alpha, its annular architecture, the archetype for Tartaria's terraced titans, both bound by the bane of the buried deluge, resets rigged by the regents of recurrence to reassert the reign of rarity. The modern mandarins Morgan's heirs with their hydrocarbon hives, the Vatican vaults vaulting the veiled verities perpetuate the ploy, promulgating Plato as parable, while pigeonholing Piri as prodigy or prank, their psyops a palimpsest over the palpable, energy's endless endowment, eclipsed to engender the empire of the enclosed, where the ether's abundance is auctioned as arcane, and the mud's murmur is muted to mere meteorology. Yet, as the dream's depths deliver a deeper draught, let the countercurrent caress with clarity's cool caress, tempering the torrent of tantalizing tendrils with the tide of the testable. Plato's Atlantis, in the pristine prose of the Academy's archives, emerges not as eyewitness eschaton but as allegorical architecture, a scaffold for the soul's symposium, the ideal isle inverted to indict the impetuous, its rings a rhetorical ringmaster for the Republic's radiant rigor, no nautical nod to the nautical, but a narrative nod to the nautical nonsense of hubris's harbour, drawn from the dross of the Dorian deluge myths, or the dregs of the Dorian's Dorian kin, Solon's Sais sojourn, a Socratic slight, the 9,000-year nonce a nonce, of narrative necessity, the Piri's precision, a prodigious patchwork pieced from the portolan puzzles of Ptolemy and the pilot books of the Portuguese pioneers, its Antarctic apparition, an artifact of anachronistic assumption, Queen Maudland's queenly quirk, a coastal crease misconstrued as continent, its ice-free ink, an interpolation from older oikumene outlines, not an oracle from the oracle's oblivion, and the Tartarian tether, a tendril of the tendentious, the mud flood's muddled meme, a modern mythos minted in the matrix of misinformation, its Atlantean alliance, an alchemical alloy of anomaly and appetite, pseudo-history's pseudopod, probing the public's penchant for the profound. Still, the dream demurs with its delicious dissonance, the helix humming a hymn that harmonizes the hazy. Why does Piri's parchment prick the pedants, its poles portrayed with a prescience that presages the polar projections of the polar pilots? Why does Plato's plain, that verdant veldt, veined with 1,000-foot canals, vibrate with the vibration of the Vistula's vanished veils, or the Volga's veiled vestiges, echoes of Tartaria's terraced terrains toppled by the tide? The reset's refrain resonates, a rhythm rogue yet rhythmic, resets rippling through the riverine reaches of recorded reverie from the deluge of Deucalion to the downpour of Deucalion's descendants, each erasure an emblem of the earth's eloquent elsewhere, whether wrought by wander comet's whim or the warp of the world's willful weave. The vision vitiates now, the helix honing to a haze that hazes into the horizon's hush, depositing you on the dream's dissolving deck, where the diadem of diachrony dims to a diaphanous diadem. Atlantis and Tartaria, twin torches in the torchlit tunnel of time, their legacies lapped by the languid lap of the lost cities, Tambian not by caprice, but by the cadence of concealment, their Tanbian a testament to the tenacious tether of the tenet. Truth, though toppled, trickles through the torrent, surfacing in the silt of our shared slumber. And so, dear nocturnal navigator, as the helix of our shared reverie unwinds its final spiral, coiling not into closure, but into the open coil of curiosity that knows no knot. We find ourselves not at a door slammed shut, but at a window cracked ajar, where the night breeze carries the faint fragrance of forgotten ink and the rustle of pages turning in a book left unbound. I am Mr. H, your whisperer in the wings of wonder, and tonight's tapestry, woven from the warp of your intriguing inquiry, that poignant plea from the comments below, pondering the vanishings of the 1600s, the mud's merciless moor in the 1700s, the orphan's odyssey through the fair's flickering facades, and the fleeting fate of those fabulous cities drapes across the threshold of your thoughts like a cloak crafted from clouds. We have wandered these whispering ways together, haven't we? From the spectral sway of train cars cradling green-tinged ghosts, to the slurry's silent swallow in Seattle's sunken streets, from Plato's perilous paradise to Peary's prescient parchment, each thread tugging us toward the tantalizing truth that history is no rigid rod, but a reed that bends in the breath of the unseen. Let us not rush the reverie's recess, though. Instead, imagine us seated now in a solarium of sorts, not the stark glass enclosure of some Victorian villa, but a sanctuary spun from starlight and suggestion, its walls woven from the willow, the wisps of what-ifs that wink in the wilderness beyond the windowpane. The air here is temperate, touched with the tang of time from an invisible herb garden and the subtle smoke of a single sandalwood taper, its flame flickering not in fear of draughts, but in fellowship with the fireflies that flit like footnotes to our fable. Pull up a cushion of cloud-soft chenille. Let your limbs loosen into the languor that lulls the limbs of lawkeepers after long labours, and allow me to unfurl this finale, not as a fanfare of finality, but as a fan of fragile feathers, each vein veined with a velvet question that invites you to inhale its intrigue one last time before exhaling into ease. Recall, if your mind's meadow still blooms with the blossoms we planted, how we began with those bewildered boys and girls on the orphan trains, their satchels sagging with the weight of world's unwritten children, not merely misplaced in the map of migration, but perhaps the last lanterns lit by a lineage lost to the loam. We traced their tremors to the tempests of trauma, those nightmares not of nursery bogies but of skies splintering like shattered sapphire, skies that sundered the stewards of a subtler splendor. And oh, the mud, that malefic medium, the earth's enigmatic embrace, rising in Moscow's moksha mire or San Francisco's seismic spew, not as nature's nonchalant nudge but as the nemesis's nod, a nutrient-rich nectar that nourished the narrative of the new while nurturing the nullification of the old. Tartaria, that tantalizing titan, emerged from the earth's exhumed entrails, a tapestry of towers that tamed the tempestuous torrent of the Telluric, antennas attuned to the atmosphere's azure anthem, cities where the census counted not in coin, but in the cascade of current drawn from the cosmos without a copper's curse. We meandered then through the meadows of the medieval and the mists of the marginal, unearthing the emerald enigmas of Woolpit, those verdant voyagers from Street, Martin's shadowed sanctum, their skin a testament to the twilight's tint, their tongue a trill that tangled with the Tatar twang of tomes long tucked away. Were they wayfarers from the world's wounded womb, rifts rent by resets that repeated like a refrain in the rock of recorded reverie? The fairs followed, those fabulous forgeries of the future Chicago's Columbian charade, Paris's universal unveiling where the whirl of the wheel and the whir of the wire masked the machinations of the masked, ethnographic exhibits as engines of empire, children catalogued like curios in the cabal's clandestine codex, their psyches primed with the ploys of persuasion, ergot echoes in the exhibit's ether, dancing plagues as the dress rehearsal for Dominion's decree. The elite's emblem, the New World Order's nascent nebula, nebulized in the neon's nascent glow, their Freemasonic filigree funding the facade, while freighting the forbidden from the fairground's folds. And in the inventor's insular igloo, amid Seattle's swift scaffold from the sludge, we witnessed the whisper of the withheld, Tesla's torpid towers, tantalized by the taboo of the ether, a quintessence quenched by the quizzlings of quota, oil's oily overlords, orchestrating the ostracism of the open-source oracle. The legacy lingered, a luminous loop linking Atlantis's annular allure Plato's perilous paradigm of Poseidon's progeny, orichalcum orbs orbiting the oracle of abundance to Tartaria's terrestrial tenure, their tentative transmission thwarted by the tidal tantrums that turned topsoil to tomb. Piri's prescient plot, that parchment pinnacle pricking the poles with polar prescience, plotted the pattern, resets as the rogue rhythm, rippling through the river of reverie, from Deucalion's downpour to the Dryas's dire dirge, each erasure an emblem of the earth's eloquent elsewhere, a cosmic cue to cull the cognoscenti and cradle the compliant. But herein, in this solarium of subtle summons, lies the lure that lingers longest, the luxury of the loose end, the liberty of the law that laps at the limits without leaping the ledge. What if the vanishings were not voids, but veils? The mud, not a mausoleum, but a matrix for metamorphosis. The orphans, not oblivion's offspring, but the omega of an older order. Their inherited hum, a harmonic hint humming through the haze of history's haze. Ponder, as the taper's flame tempers to a tender teal, the possibility that Plato's precipice was no parable but a pilfered precis, his say-sourced saga, a sanitized snippet from the scrolls of the sunken, Solon's sojourn, a sleight that slipped the substance of the subterranean into the symposium's shadow, and Piri, his portolan, a pilfered palimpsest, not from Ptolemy's prosaic projections, but from the progenitors of the pole Atlantean admirals whose admiralty arched across the Antarctic's uniced ice escape, their cartouches caressing the coasts with the caress of the clairvoyant, coasts that coursed with the current of the core's concealed cadence. The fireflies flicker faster now, forming fleeting formations, fractals of fire that fan into faces from the fringes. The green girls gaze from Woolpit's wolf pit, wide with the wonder of the wrong world. The orphan's outline on the train's fogged pane, fingers fogging the frost with forgotten filigree. The surveyor's silhouette in Moscow's mire, his plumb line plunging into the pulse of the planet's plaintive plea. Each visage voices a velvet query, a velvet that veils the vexing. If the resets recur with the regularity of a rogue metronome, what measure marks the next? Does the mud's murmur mask a modern malady? A mantle of mantle melt from the maelstroms of our melting poles? Or a man-made mimicry, geo-engineered to gird the globe in the grip of the gated? And the children, those ceaseless carriers of the concealed code, their cradle songs a cipher for the crystal's chime. Do they dream still of the deep earth's dynamo? Or has the fairground's forget-me not faded their faculties into the flat line of the factory? Inhale this intrigue, dear dreamer in the dim. Let it infuse your inhalations like incense from an invisible censer. Each breath, a bridge from the brink of the known to the nebula of the nascent. The comment that convened us, that clarion call from the chorus of your kindred spirits, querying the quandary of the quiet centuries, crackles now in the crackle of the taper's tail, a testament to the tenacity of the tale. What happened in the 1700s? The era of the mud floods, the 1600s, when all the adults seemed to vanish. Foreign children were brought in, without parents, traumatized, and from where? Perhaps the world's fairs, and why the technology and the beautifully built cities were almost destroyed right after that. Your words, woven into the warp of our wandering, wove a web that widened the window, widening the wonder that whispers through the world's weary weave. What vanished voices vibrate in your veins as you venture into the velvet void? Do the orphan's odysseys orbit your own origins? Or does the mud's methodical maw mirror the mysteries of your own muddled memories? Exhale now, and let the embers of these enigmas ease into the ember glow of ease, the solarium's sanctuary softening to the silhouette of slumber's shore. The fireflies fan out, fading into the firmament's faint filigree, their lights lingering like the last lines of a limerick left unlaced. We part not with a period's punctuation, but with the ellipsis of the eternal, an invitation to the interlude where your intellect idles in the idyll of the in-between. If this nocturnal narrative nudged the needle of your nocturnal needlework, stitching new seams into the shroud of the shrouded, then linger a lumen longer in the luminescence of the law. Drop a droplet of your deductions in the comments cascade below. What whisper from the workshops or the waves woke you widest? Which vanishing veiled the veil you yearn to unveil next? Subscribe to Mystery History for sleep if the shadows summon you still, for the solarium awaits its next seance, its windows widening to the whims of your watchful wonders. and as the taper tempers to ash, its aroma ascending like an ave to the astral, allow the ambient aria to arise, an ambient aria of ancient flutes and the faint flutter of feathered fans, a fade-out filigree that feathers the fringes of your faculties into forgetful felicity. Sleep, seeker of the subtle, not as surrender but as sojourn into the sanctum of the subconscious, where the resets replay in reverie, the mud murmurs its midnight missives, and the orphan's oracle orates in the oracle of your own one-eric odyssey. Until our next nocturnal nexus, I remain Mr. H., your humble herald of the half-seen, bidding you the benediction of the boundless sweet dreams, and may the mysteries meet you midway in the mists.